Like, obviously, if
True.
you have a cardiovascular issue or whatever, don't drink it right before you go to bed. Usual medical caveats, but it'll give you enough focus. Are we still live, by the way? Like, I
No,
just noticed.
yeah, I
Uh,
accidentally tapped the on off button.
oh,
So
rip.
we're good.
But
Yeah.
but I mean, do you want me to wait for like the whole stream
No, I
thing,
mean
or you guys
it,
don't give a
it
shit?
says we're
But
streaming again, so I mean 31 seconds
okay,
in,
bet.
so you're good. Yeah.
Yeah, but like if you can avoid even needing to rely on caffeine,
Oh
the
yeah,
best
yeah,
drug is to have a structure. Like, I'm going
yeah,
to today from this hour to this hour write, let's say, 1,000 words. Because a lot of
yeah.
writers, myself included, for the longest time, just would not have a deadline. I mean, Sneaky has seen it firsthand. I've spent like 5 years and like 7 drafts where I'd be working on the same damn book. And it was like literally the last 6 months when I like changed a few things. I think it just took me having to suck like for years to get to like where I'm at now. But like,
Yeah.
if you put enough discipline, enough time, and you take it seriously, because writing is a craft. Like, it's,
Yep.
nobody looks at a blacksmith and they're like, oh, they just started this yesterday. Like, there's a reason why it takes time. So that's why even with LeMay, like your project, it is just a personal cultivation. Like, I heard, isn't it said like your first 1 million words or something like that in writing are always going to suck, something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that saying before.
Yeah, and obviously there's exceptions and so on and so forth, but I mean, yeah. So if you're trying to come up with like better prose, good story structures, whatever, just have different influences. Like, especially in your case, since you're doing a
Certainly, yeah.
fantasy noir, I would say not only read fantasy noir. I would say if you haven't read like the Dresden Files,
Yeah.
it's like Harry Potter but with guns. It's like Harry Potter for Americans.
That
There's
is so no. That is
That
such
is
a
an
bad
insult.
description
I
of
was waiting
Dresden's
for him to
Files.
Mm.
fucking say
I
that.
Holy
yeah.
shit!
I mean, I don't know. Like, what's your take on it? Like, I think they're good. Like, I don't. Oh,
Oh
did
no
I
no
say
no!
anything
I want to be
controversial?
clear.
They're
I
No,
like the
good.
I'm
book, but to
laughing
say it's
because we
Harry
have a
Potter with
massive
guns,
Dresden fan right here.
Well,
Okay,
to
you're
I
not
say
look.
that it's
I
Harry
think
Potter with guns
detective.
is such a bad comparison. Because like,
Is it really? Okay.
yes,
It
because in
is.
no capacity is Harry Dresden anything approaching Harry Potter, right?
Mm.
Dresden didn't go to wizards. There is no magic wizard school.
Okay.
There
Yeah. I
is no high school
urban
AU.
fantasy.
It is
Yes.
it
Yeah.
is like almost Arthurian legends with if it's like if Arthurian legends had a weird hate sex baby with Columbo.
Fair.
No. Yeah. No. No. I
Actually,
get you. Like,
that's
I'm not saying like Harry Potter to diminish in any way. I'm just being
No,
urban
no, no, no,
fantasy
no, no,
still
no,
just
no, no. I'm
relatable.
not taking it as I'm saying like Harry Potter establishes the idea of young children and a magical school and a structured, relatively kind, forgiving world, barring the existence of an asshole trying to genocide people, right?
Magic
Generally,
Space
most.
Hitler.
Okay. How about a rephrasing? Detective Hellboy. Is that better?
Yeah, no,
Is this
that's a
Hellboy
much
Okay.
better
detective?
vibe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hellboy
Is it?
is
Is he? I thought he
respectable
was more like a
already.
beat up thing. I guess he's technically, 'cause it's like
No,
a weird
no, he's
mystical
not
CIA.
investigations. You're not very good at this, are you?
But no, but while he's incredibly wrong about all of the words he just said, he's also right about the point he's trying to make.
Yeah,
Hey,
but like,
I'll take being controversial. I'm cool with that.
I heard of Dresden
I
Files. I
just
need to
don't
read that
want
too.
people to get like if someone
Yeah.
hasn't read it, I don't want them to go and think
Oh, I'm gonna read Harry
Harry
Potter with
Potter.
guns. Yeah, no, I hear you.
you're
That's
gonna read
fair.
Harry
That's
Potter
fair.
with guns, because that's not it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
And I look, mentioning know your audience. I should have remembered this is a fan fiction discussion group.
Yes,
I feel like
you
you
should
gues
have.
have been around the block a few times with some Harry
We've read a
Potter
couple
stuff. So
books.
Many
Yeah.
of us
I
are a decade
activated
of fan fiction and reading right now.
True.
I
Yeah.
activated a few PTSD flashbacks. So
Yeah,
if
you
I
might
gotta
have,
pay your
yeah.
lawyer or not your therapist,
Yeah. But as sort of the recommendations I make, I think the most important one for a writer, period, hands down, if there was one thing I could tell writers, and that was the only thing I could tell them, don't be afraid of using tropes. Tropes are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They fucking
100%.
work.
Absolutely.
Don't. You can try and subvert a trope. That's fine. But just be aware of why the trope exists, why it's used, and why it's so popular before you try and subvert it. Because if you don't do that, then you have what happens in modern media. I mean, you have what happens with the story we spent the first 2 hours of this podcast talking about, of this fucking retard with his totally anti-hero edgy guy, except the anti-hero edgy guy is actually just a dude with
By edge,
flexible
yeah.
morals who wants to go save people and fight corrupt officials. It's like, but
Mm.
that's not evil. That's not edgy. That's not an anti-hero.
Yeah, like to use the most basic example, the Punisher is an anti-hero. The Punisher is a bad man who takes the law into his own hands and conducts extrajudicial killings. He's not a good person. He's not a role model.
Yeah. And that's what an anti-hero is they do villainous behavior and they believe they are doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah,
And
like sorry,
you-
I like to oh, sorry.
yeah, I'm just trying to clarify here. It's like there's a reason why we have villain defined, why we have evil defined, why we have hero and good defined, why they are an enshrined idea in the trope itself. And it's because you need those definitions to understand what is happening. You can't. This is why that story earlier failed in its concept, is because the author was like, oh, well, I'm morally gray because my character isn't some lunatic, everything's black and whiteist. And it's like, that's not what being good or bad is. Being some sort of fucking lunatic absolutist is like the most extreme version of lawful possible, but there's a reason why the D&D chart doesn't have lawful be its own square. Lawful is a column.
Yeah.
You have a spectrum of people on lawful, and it's also why lawful is not just a single point. It is a box on those columns.
And
There is
to add to
extreme
that,
versions and less extreme versions. There is people who
Yeah.
understand that things aren't black and white. That doesn't make them morally gray. That just makes them fucking normal.
Yeah.
right.
And again, just because
Sorry.
someone has a black and white view doesn't mean they can't accept the existence of moral gray either.
Well,
Right?
it kind of
The whole-
does.
No, they can understand why you can have a moment of growth.
Oh,
for
yeah,
a
I mean, sure, if
character.
you're having a character growth moment, sure. But I
Yeah,
was saying that if someone views the world in black and white, they literally can't have
Yes.
an
yes.
understanding of gray.
Sorry, what I should mean to say is I should have said they can't. It's not impossible for them to come to understand nuance. But right, like Sneaky said, there's a reason there's a chart, and that chart is composed of 6 boxes because nobody exists as one thing. You can have someone who's lawful good. Okay, they're going to try to do the right thing
within
according
the
to
bounds
the
of the
law
Mhm.
as best they can. Whereas you can have chaotic good, who's Robin Hood. Is what he's doing lawful? No, of course not. Is anyone going to deny that he's doing a good thing? No. Except
Well, I
maybe
mean,
people.
and that's another thing that a lot of people get mixed up. This comes in part and parcel with people not understanding tropes, not understanding definitions. Is lawful doesn't mean I must obey the law of the government of the land. Lawful means there is a code that you follow. That code might be the law of the land, RoboCop.
Yeah.
But that code might also be your personal
Just a strong
philosophy
belief.
about, how people should live their lives.
A good
That has
example of a
nothing to do with the
lawful
law of the land.
character, like a good example of a lawful character that doesn't obey the law, like a religious zealot, that has like
Sure.
a cult or something like
Yeah.
that, like that.
Yeah.
And so with what you were talking about, Sneaky, is like I think of a trope done poorly is when it becomes a cliche, and like
Yeah.
how something becomes a cliche is. I think a good example of to see a actually maybe not a self-aware cliche, but like knockoff like characters, especially like if you go to the dollar store, there's like a cheap action figure where it's not Superman, it's like I don't
Mega
know,
Man?
Super
Cool
Friends.
Man,
Wonder
yeah,
Man.
Wonder Man, yeah.
exactly, yeah. And it's like why is this Wonder Man a cliche whereas Superman is like a trope of a like godlike kind of character? And it's because Superman is less of a person with physical limitations having to explore moral dilemmas where it's their magnitude of character is tested. Whereas a cliche character, a Wonder Man, is just like, I'm awesome at everything. There's no conflict. Like, the bad guy, I already stop him before it even happens. That's where it gets to the cliche, is it is robbed of the
Nuance.
it's robbed of nuance. Exactly.
Yeah. One of the best Superman stories of all time is All American Superman, and it is entirely about Superman voluntarily refraining from using his powers as he walks across the United States, exploring the United States in a way that he never has before, because he's walking as Superman when he could be not just flying, but super speed flying.
Right. Yeah, no, and unfortunately, it does take a certain level of depth and intelligence on the writer's part to do it. And it's not always a direct intelligence issue. Writing brings up a lot of thinking on the author's end. If it if it's a good story,
You think?
yeah, if it's a good story. Writing brings up a lot of thinking on the author's end. The author has to think about a lot of things. And what happens with a lot of bad writing is that you can tell the author didn't think about things. And usually people like that don't think about things because it's not that they're too stupid to understand. No, they fully understand. The reason why they didn't think is because they don't want to think. Is because if they did think, they would have to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. And they don't want to do that. So they don't think. And instead, they rake some cliche garbage, and the story crashes and burns because they included too much garbage, because they were too focused on the cool thing, or whatever in the moment was popular, and whatever they wanted to, whatever they shit out of their fantasy. They had a daydream today, and they had a really cool scene in their mind, so they put that in the story, and that kind of ruined the entire story, and now it's impossible to continue it because, now he's like beyond God tier, and he's like able to snap things out of existence, and nothing's a threat to him anymore. So,
something we haven't discussed too much, but related to all this, is outlining. I think is definitely important.
Oh,
in some way,
certainly,
shape,
yeah.
or form. And I've had to come around to it because I'd be like, oh, I'm a gardener or a pantser, whatever you call it, a discovery writer. Like I'll figure it out as I go. And there is some credibility to that, but I think writing down what it is you want to be your plot, what you want to be kind of your character arc. So character arc, like the character starts out one way and then they either gain or lose something or both by the end of the narrative. Like
Right,
at least
and
knowing
I
these
mean,
things.
that's
yeah.
what I'm saying, though, is that they have to think. They have to sit there
It's true.
and conceptualize, how do people change? why do people change? What events cause people to change? And when you think about that stuff, very few people have perfect compartmentalization. So if you start thinking about how John Halo, your character who's gonna, lose his family's farm and goes on a quest for revenge, if you think about how his childhood affected how he grew up, you're gonna start thinking about your childhood. You're gonna take, all authors do this, by the way. You're gonna take what you had as a childhood, what you saw from childhood from other people, what you read about childhood from your favorite sources of media, and you're going to conglomerate all of that into John Halo's childhood. And that means you have to think about your childhood. And if your childhood wasn't great, then, well, you might be the sort of person who wants to avoid that sort of thing. And those people then produce a subpar story because John Halo's childhood feels like this really cliched childhood of I've only seen shit from Hollywood. Because like this actually happens a lot in the Harry Potter section, of course. Because in the books of Harry Potter, as we know, Harry was minorly abused. He was neglected, which is abuse. He was swatted at, which is abuse, but we're talking like the lightest. We're talking the ghee of abuse.
I thought you said swatted at first. I was like, what's Voldemort doing? Shit.
Yeah. Petunia, one time in a fit of rage, swiped at Harry with the frying pan and did not hit him.
To be clear, getting swiped at with the frying pan, abuse.
Yes,
Hey,
but also to be clear,
idea though.
This
Cyberpunk
was
Harry Potter.
Well, I've seen plenty of that. To also be clear here, though, is that was not portrayed as a common thing Petunia did. That was portrayed as a single time instance that Petunia did it, and then like instantly after that was like, "Ooh, well, I should not have done that."
Yeah.
And what happens in fan fiction of Harry Potter, however, you can blatantly see either the author is massively projecting or they have no idea how childhood works because their childhood was either their childhood was so distorted or they just they didn't want to think about childhood, so they're just copying, pasting what they saw from like Hollywood or other fan fictions. Because we'll get Harry Potter stories where it's like, yeah, that's right, Vernon whipped out his dick and raped Harry Potter for the 18th time that day. This is a normal day for Harry Potter. Then he broke 9 of Harry's bones, so he couldn't run away. And then he brought Dudley over, and then Dudley did the same thing. And then, he was blissfully knocked unconscious by 7 swipes of the iron cast pan from Petunia. Just another day in the life of Harry Potter.
And when he finally unlocked his magical core, he became a cat boy, and Snape proceeded to give him 7,000 anal fissures.
The authors barely concealed the fetish.
Yeah, true.
How does this not get banned? Like, side note.
We don't know, and we've tried really hard.
Because the people who are
don't know.
Matt jack off to it.
Basically, the fanfiction.net website is heavily unmoderated, and it's only when people reach a critical threshold of Slanesh worship does the Reddit does the website
the warp
owner
ruptures, and there has to be like an Imperial Crusade.
There's quite literally there's been multiple purges throughout the history of FFN, and it's whenever the Slanesh worship reaches maximum overload that like it reaches the domain provider or the credit card provider for fanfiction.net. And the owner of the website's like, oh, okay, fucking exterminatus, and like 100,000 stories get deleted.
They're just
now
killing each other down there. I think it's time to just drop the exterminatus upon these heretics. All right, fire.
Yeah, so it's heavily unmoderated, but I mean, like, So the actual story itself, the progress of that story that isn't just bits and pieces of everything I put together. So the actual progress of one of the stories that Atin was quoting was Harry Potter was about 6 years old and was raped daily by Vernon. And Vernon gave him 312 anal tears before he was sold into sex
Jesus.
slavery
Gee,
for
what
Aunt
the
Marge's
fuck?
dog. And
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
he's being
Yeah, you don't
raped
remember
by
the
Aunt
anal
Marge's
tears?
dog. Oh, by the way, when he was being raped by Aunt Marge's dog, so I want you to keep this in mind. He was being raped by Aunt Marge's dog, and Harry proceeds to get saved by Severus Snape, who shows up because of one of Dumbledore's whistly-doos was going off finally. And Snape knocks out both Vernon and Marge and the dog, and does a diagnostic charm on Harry. And the diagnostic charm on Harry reports back that Harry has broken so many bones in his body, he grew extra bones to break.
All right, Sneaky. I'm
Shoot.
putting the Geller field on. Let's get out of the warp a little bit with this shit.
Yeah, can we get out of? Can we not?
No. You're gonna hear all the horrors.
I
of
will
the war.
I will tell this singular
realizing
story.
My Dresden comparison. I'm realizing the mine I stepped on now.
And I feel the warp overtaking me. It is a good pain.
An open
Yeah.
mind is like a fortress left unguarded and unattended.
Exactly.
So the story continues with 312 anal tears as well as part of the diagnostic, and we looked this up. An anal tear is a 1-inch tear. There is not enough intestinal tissue to have 312 tears.
That depends on how big the tears are.
Look,
No, it's
I'm
not.
starting to-
1
look,
inch. A tear is 1 inch. I literally just
genetic-
told
I'm
you
st-
this.
Look, I'm starting to understand why you got shadow banned on YouTube. At first, I was like, I'm not sure. Like, they're talking about important writing stuff, and now we're like in the where that
It's
what's
starting
that
to- it's starting to
dark
click,
the
huh?
dark Druki fortress that like the Slanesh worshippers
The
have. Where
people
the-
must know about
dark
the anal
colors, though.
tears. They can't keep hiding it from us.
I feel like they
Okay,
should
Alex
continue
Jones.
hiding it from us. Can we just have that be a constant?
like, yeah, I mean, look, getting
Look, the
to, like, the
story
whole,
has
like,
a happy.
trope and
Okay, so yeah,
cliche,
don't
like,
don't worry. The story's got a happy ending. Snape saves him, adopts him as his own son. Harry turns into a literal baby cat, and then they have sex.
okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's 3 Slaneshi crab claws out of 10.
Yeah, like I say, when I was saying there has to be a Slanesh worship overload for the purge to occur, I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't
no,
kidding.
I think I remember you told me the story like 5 years ago, and I felt like you
Yes.
needed like therapy. I was like, dude, I think you've been traumatized. Like this poor soul.
I haven't been. I mean, I was sort of traumatized by it, but like not really traumatized by it. More of like a horrid fascination of the fact that someone could wake up in the morning and go, "Yeah, I should write this."
This is
Okay,
what I want to write.
You know, on a more productive like note, talking about not. I mean, I don't know. This feels like if you put it behind like a. I don't know, like maybe not like YouTube proper, or you could have like a do's and don'ts for like fan fiction, that would
Yeah.
might be good. I will say though, this reminds me of like I don't know if you guys ever do those ironic readings of like fiction where you do like AI like voice like changes and stuff.
Yeah,
But I remember,
I've
like,
done that occasionally. Yeah.
yeah, but like I remember there was that trend of them back when Mass Effect was like still popular. They'd read like
Oh,
the
yes,
Mass
the
Effect
Master
like, fan
Chief.
fiction.
Yes,
Yeah,
the Master
those-
Chief. Yes.
Yeah, like-
Swah.
Yeah, like I mean,
Arby and the
it's
Chief.
kind of it's kind of funny
Yes,
how
Arby
like
the Chief.
grotesque a lot of this stuff like can be, but as far as like making a trope for let's say like romance like in fiction, how do you guys if you were to write like a romance scene, like would you actually make something not terrible? Like, is
Well,
what
okay,
I'm
so
curious.
first
well,
things first,
so-
you don't ask sign.
I'll speak for Gray and I.
Fuck off.
Yeah, that too. I'll
Quiet,
speak for Gray and I.
Horny.
We don't. How do we write a romance scene? Easy. Don't.
I think you guys are talented enough. If you set your mind to it, you probably
No,
could,
no. I just I'm
conceptualize it.
not
No.
like I'm not a romance guy. I don't have interest in it. I don't really find rom-coms to be interesting from a storytelling perspective.
I'll share for LeMay because it was kind of a loaded question. Because
okay.
if he's wanting to write noir, there's
I'm
always
gonna
going
fire
to be some
this
kind of femme
Chekhov's
fatale,
gun at
I feel
you.
like. Yeah. So like when you're writing, definitely like Dresden Files, since you're doing a fantasy setting, it's definitely worth reading because there will be romance explored in it. It's kind of funny too because like there will be like lines where it's like it was like a sexual kitten purr or something like it's just like out there like
That
like
was
shit, you know?
listen. I'll
It
defend
was
a
funny.
lot of
It was
stuff
funny.
that Dresden does. That won't be one of them. I read that and I was like, "Hey Jim, what the fuck,
But
man?"
but
what the fuck, Jim?
I share
obviously
things
never
like that,
written
LeMay,
romance.
because like don't be afraid to just try to write the romance scene because even if it comes off campy, but it's still like seems genuine, like there's real chemistry there. Like if you discover in a plot like there should be a romance plot line, whether the characters start out with the romance or a romance happens later. If you have made proper characters like they are tropes, they aren't
Yeah.
cliches, and there seems to be a romance thread, definitely explore that in a noir. People love that stuff. And if you
Yep.
can,
Yep.
I'm not saying get visceral with like sex scenes or romance scenes, but like in a tasteful way, try to explore those. And that's why I think reading what's already been published out there, you'll be able to see how are ways I can have a vocabulary to communicate these scenes, you know?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
a thing you want to avoid is like if you don't read a noir story that has like a tastefully explored romance plot line, you're gonna be like a high schooler that's trying to explore romance for the first time.
Yeah,
but
you're gonna
you know?
be the average fanfic author trying to describe sex. Yeah, I took out my ordinarily sized 32-inch penis, and its engorged mass pierced her cervix.
Yeah.
Excuse
My
you.
throbbing rod.
My meat mast.
She got anally obliterated.
I'm going to make you ride the
And then I screamed, "I'm the conductor of the poop train."
Then I fired my gun into the air as I hit my peak and screamed yeehaw.
I randomly punched a window and glass shattered. Yeah, just random shit. Yeah.
I had to take a moment to make sure that I could free the weight of my massive balls from my pants.
Yeah,
They were usually constrained in
like
there.
it's really, really obvious when someone who's never had sex before tries to write a sex scene because it's just like, yeah, bro, that's that's not how any of that works.
I guess to put the ball in your court, LeMay, like, do you have like any questions? Like, because I'm just curious, you know, because I try to work on noir type stuff. Again, mine's like science fiction, like noir, but it's like, you know, it's in the family, and so I'm curious in that genre.
Welcome to the
like,
family, son.
yeah, you know.
When I
Oh,
welcome my
hey
child family by
there.
punching him in
Why
the
don't
face.
you put the lotion on my back, Chris?
Nope, stop.
Stop.
No.
Stop that
Bad.
immediately.
No.
I
I
got
see
some
you
candy
typing, LeMay,
behind the
so I'm curious.
counter there, Chris. You want to bend over and get it for me?
Somebody give me mod powers so I can mute and kick Sneaky.
So you said, do I plan for an arranged engagement? with one
That'll
of
be the
them?
fucking day.
So you're meaning like there's an arranged marriage, like in like a sequel book
At
is what
the
you're
book-
thinking?
The book's not romance. There are women who are interested. Do I plan for an engagement with them?
So do you mean should you plan for a romance ahead of time, or is this like an arranged marriage plot line? Like, because that's important to distinguish.
Yeah. Oh, Yes, thank you. That really cleared it up there, LeMay. I fucking swear to God. Like streamer, like
binary
viewer.
option.
Okay. Well, I'll just explore both of these. So,
yes,
yeah.
both.
So there's two ways. There's two ways I think about exploring a romance plotline and a story. Either, and it depends on your outlining. So again, if you have an outline and you're exploring the plot, let's say it's John and Jane, like these are your two protagonists. It's like they already at the start of the story are like married. Like from right there you already can start planning the dynamics for the characters. Now, if it's John, like Act 1, he's got to figure out this murder mystery. Act 2, he meets Jane at a bar. Now, that's a different, set of interactions we're exploring because they're now meeting each other for the first time. Depending on the attributes of the character, maybe John is like really, he's got a good sense of humor, and like Jane, she's like really social. So Jane's like, hey, how are you doing? And John's like, God, an angel, fall out of the sky, just some pickup line or whatever,
I mean,
And
another
they're already-
classic one is the whole, she thinks he's a creep, or she thinks he's full of himself at first, and then some sort of event occurs where either like he saves her or pulls off some sort of heroic deed, and she realizes that maybe he's like got a soft side to him that she didn't realize before, and then that's what leads into their continued relationship away from the oh, he's a pig angle. Like
so LeMay,
StarCraft's a great example of that.
I would ask then, since you have a very loose outline, because it seems like you're still developing it, like the overall content, the overall plot. I would say, what kind of themes are you trying to explore? Like, is this a good triumphs over evil, or like this is a mysterious world with backstabbing? That's important to understand.
True.
And
Yeah.
then what emotions are you conveying? Is this so? What I was taught, like in one of my classes, there are 4 different kinds of endings to that could happen in a story. There's the hero
Heroic
gets what
rise,
they
heroic
want, but they're
fall.
not happy. Yeah, the hero gets what they want, but they're not happy about it. They don't get what they want, but they're happy about it. Or they don't get what like, so it's a permutation of that. So the hero getting what they want, but they're not happy about it. It could be like a war movie, like Saving Private Ryan. Like, the character's fine, Private Ryan, but a shit ton of people died. So like they accomplished their goal, but at what cost? A protagonist not getting what they want, being happy, I was told, is like a rom-com. So like, the guy, he's a nerd, he wants the cheerleader girl, she rejects him, he's devastated, and then his nerdy best friend, this nerdlit lady, turns out they're
Nerdlit.
soulmates. And they're happy, and that's
Right, yeah.
so so it's important. So if you could elaborate on that a bit, I could try to laser focus on that for you.
Well, and not
just my
only that,
perspective.
it's not only for an ending, but it's also what you want to keep in mind when you're writing the story is what direction do you want the river to flow? Is this a story where it's a gritty world and your character is, in a disadvantageous position at the start, and the story is about their rise where they bring a moral with them, a creed with them, or some sort of injustice overturned with them by the end of the story? Or is this a story about their fall? Is this a story about someone who is going out, who's trying to do good, and then in the process of trying to do good, they encounter some information or discovery where they find out the church is secretly killing babies and sacrificing them to the anti-Satan, who is like a more powerful version of Satan, and they're gonna summon him into the world, and so now he's gotta like compromise on his morals and values. He can't rely on the law anymore because he doesn't know who's compromised. And then basically it's a fall that by the time he finally makes it to stopping the anti-Satan from being summoned into the world, he's really not much of a better person than the people he's trying to stop. Because, he went into the ends justify the means argument when confronted with the problem before him. So it's very dependent on how you want this to go. If we want to use sign here as a punching bag. We can go with his Zuko story, where the purpose of the story is for the character to go on this philosophical understanding of the world arc, where he leaves the Fire Nation as a wandering prince and returns as this enlightened philosopher king.
So, LeMay, can I read just for like the stream or whatever, like the blurb you had shared, or do you want me to
go
just
ahead,
like
hit 'em.
refer to it? Okay. Well, the blurb that LeMay shared is Ivan Inquis is a young detective hailing from the Inquis family, a line of imperial investigators and spies tasked with solving crime involving weavers, powerful beings capable of controlling ether, the fifth element. After the suspicious death of a Marshall Weaver Academy student underneath the Emperor's protection, the Emperor's hand, Lady Penny Royal appeals to the Inquis family to investigate. Outrageously, she wants aetherless Ivan to infiltrate the school undercover as a student with an experiential, I'm assuming you meant experimental pair of ether-controlled gloves. This unreasonable request only adds to the bad blood between Lady Penroyal and the Inquis family caused by the mysterious death of Ivan's mother. Ivan and the Inquis accept the case out of their sense of duty and the hopes of uncovering what Penroyal and her sublime weavers are up to. So just right there, like you had mentioned, a lady that could be your femme fatale. So I'd look up like the trope. Yeah, like so first off, this isn't quite a blurb. One of the ways to say a blurb is think of I've heard it called an elevator pitch. Imagine
Yeah.
you want to be like a screenwriter and you're in an elevator for like 30 seconds. There's a movie director who barely even wants to like talk to you. How do you catch his attention? You know? So if you so what I would say with what you told me is I'd be like, it's a steampunk murder mystery with tons of fucking, right? You know, just something like that. You know, like, just kind of.
If I was gonna
Half
summarize
that
it based off of
count.
what we got here,
Yeah.
it's a 1920s take on old class aristocracy meeting a sense of duty, with murder mystery, where the up and coming hero goes undercover to
I'd even cut it there a little bit.
yeah, you know, like I'm just trying to like uncover a plot that threatens the nation.
Yeah, so you could even say like 1920s steampunk fantasy political murder intrigue story. You know, like something.
Yeah.
It
Now
really
you're just listing tags.
Seems less a
tags.
blurb.
Yeah,
I think this is more a
yeah,
summary, less a blurb.
but yeah, this is definitely more of a summary kind of like.
Also, by the way, I just say, Aeon, you made the same mistake I did when I first read through what they gave us. It's Penny Royal, not Pen Royal. I think she should drop the Y out of I think she should drop the Y out of that because my brain refuses to recognize that as
yeah. Pen
Yeah.
roll sounds better. It rolls off the tongue better.
I mean, also on top of that, I feel so. Here's the thing when it comes to naming conventions, you either can lean into the very on the nose naming conventions. Ivan Inquis is an inquisitor from the Inquis family.
Right.
That's perfectly fine if you lean into the naming conventions. Who's this villain? Oh, she's Penny Royal. She's, suspicious royalty who's, who's got her fingers in everything. This bad guy, oh, their name is, suspicious shady guy number 3.
But
don't worry about
if you want to make
shady over here.
If you want to make
shady,
pun names, I cannot recommend enough taking a little bit of time to go read even like just the first book of Eminence in Shadow, but really the tournament.
Yeah.
Eminence
in Shadow.
What were his friends' name? Eaton and Potato.
Skellington and Potato, yeah. Eminence in Shadow is definitely a great one if you want to have really lean into the pun names. I'm only appearing once in this fight. I'm gonna lose next. I'm gonna be the victor.
So I just shared the TV tropes like little link like thing for it. So let me see the themes you mentioned. So overarching themes: humanity meddles with an otherworldly force that they have no business messing with and suffering from the consequences.
Classic. Yep.
Bioethics, might makes
Classic.
right, technology
Classic.
versus human welfare, the exploitation and lack of dignity for soldiers, genetic
Sure.
supremacy and eugenics, redemptions and forgiveness, damage mitigation and compromise. So like
Well, that last one's kind of the same word twice.
yeah, what I would say is like trying to tie that into how the noir plot kind of is going. I would say this is gonna get really abstract, but you're like the summary that you shared. It seems to be like kind of a political intrigue where I wasn't hearing a lot of like magitech, like
Not a lot of
eugenics kind of going on.
philosopher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the
It does
themes
not
you
sound
have
like that.
yeah, the themes you have are a little higher brow, which that's not bad necessarily. It's just going to take a little more cautious hand to make sure you execute
I
that.
will
'Cause-
also say, as just a personal preference, but I don't really take philosophy stories from teenagers seriously. If this is someone who's young
yeah,
enough
no.
to enter an academy as a student, I don't really want to hear their take on philosophy.
yeah, and if it's a
Yeah.
student, that complicates noir because
No.
usually noir it's for like more of an adult plot line. So now I'm kind of understanding
Yeah.
it's like a student. I'm trying to like piece that because
I
usually a detective it's somebody that's like kind of cynical and had a negative
Yeah,
experience.
noir doesn't
I'm
get
certainly
philosophical, noir
interested
gets
in the
cynical.
idea of a noir story
Yeah.
from the perspective of someone
It
who
could.
enters into it, thinking along the lines of, young, naive, dutiful, maybe a little bit I know more, that teenagers kind of have, but still at the same time he's not jaded yet, and the story is either going to be about him retaining that optimism, that youthful optimism, or becoming jaded from the information he discovers and how that changes him as a person. I think that would make for a very interesting story, but I definitely don't really feel like high philosophy of, bioethics, the exploitation of the soldiery, eugenics, redemption and forgiveness. Redemption and forgiveness is, kind of mixed in with the classical hero journey, but at the same time, you really shouldn't be focusing on the philosophical aspects of that. You should be focusing more on the social aspects of that for a younger audience, young adult story targeting.
And not only just young adult, but just writing in general, especially if you're trying to write a like novel and not literary fiction, focus on making an entertaining story first, and then maybe in later drafts weaving in kind of some philosophy, because otherwise you'll get kind of paralyzed, or
Well, I
you're
mean,
kind of having a narrator.
you can
like,
certainly have the plot points of all of that. Like, he
yeah,
can uncover a plot of eugenics, but going into why that is wrong and why we need to, advance together hand in hand instead of selecting who gets to move on. Don't get into the weeds on that. It's fine if you're like, oh, this is the bad guy plan. They want to kill people for not being good enough. That's fine. Don't get into the weeds on, the whole philosophy of it.
Yeah, I would say unless eugenics and an exploration of it is a key theme, most people are generally going to accept that killing people because they're inferior is bad. You're not gonna hard sell. Not gonna need to hard sell your audience on that.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah,
I mean,
and
if you want to have like a
right.
if you want to have a very
Uh,
philosophical eugenics take, not even saying it's good or bad, like a more a story with a philosophical take on eugenics would be something like, the hero uncovers a plot about some eugenics program where they've been secretly manipulating the population in a certain direction, and then the reason why they've been doing it is actually because they've detected something in the genome or whatever, or some sort of magic illness that's going to kill everyone that doesn't have this certain genetic marker
Like-
in them, and so they've been secretly, propagating this certain genetic line in the population to prevent a civilization collapse when
Yeah.
everyone gets sick and
I've-
dies from it.
I've
Like,
got a
I'll share
question
with-
that's not being asked here. LeMay, is the murder mystery in the first book, or is the murder mystery over several books?
Oh, that's true
Or
as
is
well.
it
Does he
several murder
solve the murder
mysteries?
in the initial
Oh
book,
yeah.
or is he
Because-
getting
Sherlock
involved in the
Holmes.
mystery at first,
Here-
and then
here's
he
the
solves
thing.
it over? Yeah, true.
What has been given here is a list of
Yeah.
things that you could take your noir world and have your character develop through each of these in separate books. But if the murder mystery is several books,
Yeah,
that's a lot to throw into a plot. And murder mysteries,
Yeah.
exactly.
if there are any I think it's Conan or Case
Conan.
Closed, either
Yep.
Conan. Yeah,
Conan.
if there are any Conan fans here, how you guys liking that mystery still not being solved? 1,000
Fucking
episodes in.
Yeah. Don't even start with me.
So you can have an overarching whodunit mystery, but you need to have smaller mysteries scattered throughout to actually, satisfy and scratch
Or-
that itch that you came there for.
Yeah, or
And
Right.
LeMay, that's another thing is you say you don't intend to have Ivan preach about these issues. He stumbles across it. It doesn't matter if it's in the narrative. You have to just move past
me-
it. It can
let
be
me
a problem,
provide
but you can't.
Let me
There we go.
provide this because one thing to just massage a little bit what Insane Silence is saying in the
Yeah.
chat. He says philosophy is highly subjective. Philosophy done poorly is highly subjective. There's actually supposed to be a very clear distinction.
Yes.
For example, two major schools of ethics. There is subjectivity and what's called deontology. And for like subjectivism or relativism is like certain things are justifiable. Like the classic examples, like the trolley problem. Like, do you do nothing and let 10 people die, or do you pull the lever and have one person die? And a subjectivist moral perspective is you pull the lever and have one person die because it's harm mitigation. Whereas a deontologist is certain things are objectively wrong. So saying like killing, if you make a decision to kill in any perspective, is incorrect. So it might be kind of awkward to have a trolley problem, like thought experiment, but at least, if somebody talks to you about killing, you have that philosophical certainty that I do know killing like is wrong. So like in a certain way, philosophy done right is supposed to make things a little more clear. And the problem is most people are not academics studying philosophy. I barely understand philosophy.
Right.
I
No,
understand
and
enough
that's
from writing,
also why they go with like a couple of really good classical setups, and where say it's a noir story, cynical. The detective starts off cynical. He's like, "Oh, great, another useless broad coming in to give me more problems." And then by the end of the story, his cynical attitude has been philosophically challenged to make, so he doesn't judge everyone by his first look on them, or, something like that. Or, flip side, his cynical attitude is reinforced, that in the end, she truly just did give him more problems and he was right all along. It's fine. So you have the old cynical veteran. The flip side of the old cynical veteran is the younger, naive kid who might have some idea of like, oh, killing is wrong, killing will never solve the problem, and part of the story becomes a challenge to that philosophy of where he is in a situation where if he doesn't kill, people die.
Right.
And
that's
or
exploring the
he
philosophy.
finds a
That's
way
the
to
rookie.
resolve it without that, right? Great example.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can
Avatar: The
certainly
Last
have
Air-
that, yeah.
No, like I'm saying, like great example. Avatar: The
was an
Last Airbender.
ass pull.
It's important for Aang's character because not just for Aang as a character, but Aang as the last air nomad, right? The last representative of his culture and ideals and his entire people group's way of thinking. It's important that he try and find a way to defeat the Fire Lord that doesn't involve killing him, but he needs some kind of final way of stopping the Fire Lord, because to allow him to continue is objectively incorrect, to the point that even other airbenders are like, you might just gotta kill a guy.
Well, no, see, that's the
Yes.
thing, though, is that
it's-
even
Remember
Monk
Monk
Gyatso,
Gyatso?
his mentor character, killed over 100 firebenders.
Surrounded
And
by skeletons.
Yes.
the thing is that Gyatso wasn't the last airbender. Gyatso would be able to turn his back, air quotes, on his culture temporarily, because he isn't the only inheritor of the culture. He isn't the final standard bearer of the culture.
Right.
And Yang feels like he is.
Yang?
Yeah, Yang.
Well,
he grew some hair and
Yang
boobs.
gang aside, like something to kind of explore when wanting to do philosophy mixed with your themes is a way I try to think is like, what is the difference between like an interesting story and propaganda, like story with a moral, like kind of
True.
interesting story is like, to take like an easy example, like an orcish horde. Propaganda would just be like orcs are bad, like that's, you're just saying it to the reader, you're treating them as dumb. Whereas like an interesting story, like like in Tolkien's like writings, like the original orcs, just through implication, they're created by the dark, the Dark Lord Sauron. They eat human flesh, they torch villages. Where it's like seeing what they do through implication makes them bad. Similar thing like Nazis. Like why are Nazis bad? Well, because
they're Nazis.
yeah, exactly. Just because they're Nazis, it's like no, it's they declare war on
You did not
everybody.
see
They
his
lie about
opinion.
yeah.
Right,
Got him.
They
Yeah,
preach killing. They declare they are aggressors in war, etc., etc., etc.
They wear black with skulls on their uniform. It's just like various
True.
things like that through the
Yes.
implication.
The classic.
Like which that's funny. I heard this is a bit of a tangent, but George Martin, he talked about why fiction is so interesting to write because people will be primed to like have plausible deniability of like what is believable, and he's like he finds that weird because history is not limited by like what is plausible, because like if you in like in the 1920s
I mean,
wrote a
history has
story,
some wild shit in it. Like, there's a whole fucking arc where the entire British Navy's history changes because one British noble got killed by other British nobles. So the wife of the British noble went to France, learned how to be a pirate, became one of the worst pirates to ever reave the high seas, to the point where Britain lost its entire navy, got invaded, and had a mass genocide of the upper caste.
well
No
related
one
to
saw that coming!
Related to, exactly. So now imagine you're a speculative fiction writer in the 1920s. It's like 1923, just to throw a number out, and you're like, the Germans, like they're pissed off about World War One. And you write a story like, man, I think in 20 years the Germans are going to declare war on everybody. They're going to try to make a bomb that like is brighter than the sun, that they get beaten by like other factions, and they're going to put people in kettles and cook them while they wear black uniforms with skulls. People will tell you you're a crank, and that's basically what exactly happened.
Yeah.
20 years later, and so there's so exploring philosophy can be very powerful in a story, but like for example, like George Martin, like in Game of Thrones, like why Game of Thrones is so powerful is like there are tropes people expect in fantasy. Like the knight always wins the sword fight. The damsel in distress always gets saved from the dragon. And then book one, like Act One or whatever, freaking Ned Stark gets his head cut off, and the reader's like, "You're not supposed to do that." But George Martin's exploring a philosophy. He's exploring people are flawed. They do screwed up shit.
Remember, GRRM is the guy who gave us 3 pages of a woman in medieval times taking a dump.
Yeah. So I mean, but he is his approach on fantasy is interesting. However, I will quote Epic Rap Battles of History on this one when they had R.R. Martin versus Tolkien. It's called fantasy, you moron. It's not supposed to be realistic.
Fair enough. And so there's another book. I'm actually in the process of reading it right now. But it kind of clued me in because LeMay mentioned eugenics, like a mystery thing. I'm reading The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, and it's interesting because it explores eugenics in it. But it's these memory police it's first person perspective. It's very surreal. It's not noir. It's purely a dystopian, like 1984 style Orwell kind of
it's
story.
another thing that people have to keep in mind when they are trying to write these overarching stories like this, is that some topics are so heavy in the cultural zeitgeist. If your story is going to touch upon it in any way besides generic bad plan of the villain today, of the week, then that has to be the focus of the story. It has to be all about it. The overarching plot has to be about it. The character's arc has to be about it. The events have to be about it.
Many spoilers. It's a great book, Memory Police. Definitely check it out. It's the dystopia genre, and I don't mean like cyberpunk dystopia, just capital D dystopia. It explores genetics, but from the perspective of like, what would it be like to be a character in some weird experimental, almost like death camp thing, where people are getting selectively picked for their genes to try to like mess around with like memory sequencing. And like the Memory Police, they're not like, guys the character are fighting. They're almost like a force of nature. They're like scooping people up in the middle of the night and taking them in a truck to like some laboratory, and people have to make it, and so if you're going to explore genetics and that kind of thing, you're going to have a character where he's in a world of cloak and dagger, like shadow, weird, like, this is where like studying politics, like what is the vibe of a place like Washington, D.C., and how do you convey that in your setting if you're going to explore something like genetics and eugenics,
Now, I will also say, sort of off of the beaten path, but certainly in the same vein and pacing style, Bones and House MD are very interesting, guess noir-like takes on the genre, because it's very different approaches to noir. With House, you still have the cynical main guy, but the cynical main guy is always right at first. In the classic noir, it's your first pick is usually always wrong, and it's usually because you were led to the wrong answer initially in the noir, and it's supposed to be this whole fake out usually. In House, it's the opposite, where House is usually right the first time, but he either gets questioned or they're asking for proof and he doesn't have it, so he has to move on. And then they test everything, they circle back, it finally comes out, House was right about it. The problem gets solved. He comes up with some crazy plot to do it. And then Bones is a similar thing where they're putting back they're studying crime scenes, and they're trying to figure out cold cases effectively of how did this person die, why did they die, who did it, and they're trying to put together the scene again to figure out the history of everything on it. And Bones is interesting because it adds a little bit more political intrigue, because they're the Washington Institute of something or other, and they have an FBI attachment, and they get into a more social noir thing in the more modern day as well, in where they realize that this important person is being accused, or actually these last 4 cases of theirs were all serial killings meant to get their attention. Shit like that. And now they have to prevent the next. Yeah. And so it's a different style, but it's still noir in the end. Oh, good night, Gray.
Good night, Gray.
So, I definitely recommend them because they're both good shows. They both tell it in a different way, and I'm certain they can give you more ideas on how you want to portray this 19-year-old entering into this academy where he's trying to pretend to be a mage that he isn't, or weaver.
So a question I kind of just have is, LeMay, like what are kind of like questions or thoughts you have on the top of your head? Because I feel like a lot of this is drinking from a fire hose. Not that this isn't
Yeah,
good
true.
information.
No,
It's
very
just gonna
true.
take
Yeah.
time to digest it, you know. So
Yeah,
I just thought I would check with you.
you
Hope
guys
you're
have
taking
kind of just
notes.
blasted a
Right?
bunch of
That's
stuff.
like I
Well,
mentioned
see,
two
the
like specific
great
books where I
part,
was like, you should take notes.
the great part is that we're broadcasting all of this, so they can always just go
Wink, wink, nudge,
rewatch
nudge.
it.
Yeah.
You'd have to go rewatch it, and that's a big no.
Yeah,
See,
just
the
timestamp
problem
the
is
Harry
that
Potter
this is
Gellerfield, you know.
currently
True.
4 hours long.
Yeah, well,
but
you
they
And
can
they
skip
know,
one
didn't
and two.
fuck
show
you,
up.
Let's be
Max.
real.
They
They can
didn't
skip
show
the
up
first
until
two.
hour 1.
No,
Well,
not
that's
even
only
first.
3
because-
hours they have to review then. Even better.
I mean, you could probably get one of those AI tools to like just make a transcription, you know, and then you could
True.
just like try to find whatever.
Have you seen
Beneficial
how
use for
poorly
shit
those
GPT.
things
One of the
subtitle that stuff?
5% use cases of
Yeah.
AI is good.
I got a notepad
Sorry,
No,
I was
open.
quiet. I didn't mean to
they
talk
don't
over
do
you.
Nice,
voice
nice.
to
No,
text well.
No, they're not very good at speech to text, especially when you start
Wait,
getting
I
into
will
certain
do a
dialects and
caveat.
accents.
11 Labs is really good, but it costs money. That's the only thing I will say.
Ring Central also does a decent one, I will say.
I'm telling you, 11 Labs is crazy good. I can even show you. I've made like audiobooks.
Yeah,
out
go
of it.
make Grok watch every single one of our podcasts and distill
Oh,
down the
Jesus.
information within to the ultimate pearl of writing wisdom. And then you
Yeah,
shall ascend to the high planes of the other ascended writers.
Yeah, and make Grok make the best Garfield with like huge tits and like an AK-47 that you can imagine, you know, because that's what
So,
AI is best for.
What?
So Sneaky, can we ban this man from speaking words?
And that's how
Yeah,
this
that
entire
is it.
podcast ends, with me banning him from the Discord.
Cool.
Dude,
Never to be
oh
seen
my
again.
God, have you seen
Ban
like
him
Facebook?
for thought crime. Listen. I don't think that thought crime should be punishable, but I think some thoughts are criminal enough that they do deserve it. Not all of them, but just mods. This one here.
Mods.
That man didn't commit a thought crime. He
Unsocial
committed
his credit score.
-5
Ooh.
social credit score. Dude, but have you seen like Facebook? It's just so cringe. Like I have to go on there to message people sometimes, and every time I do, I feel like I got one of those like RFK Jr. brain warps. Like every time.
My
Like, with all the
worry
AI
right
shit out
now
there.
is the hook, and if it's interesting enough for the reader to continue. Alright, so I mean, I think we covered the hook pretty thoroughly, so the first 3 pages. So what I always say is the summary should make you open the book. Opening the book should make you read the first page. So the first sentence should make you read the first paragraph. The first paragraph should make you read the first page. The first page should make you read the first chapter. The first chapter should make you read the book. As far as the hook goes, we covered it pretty thoroughly. I think you need to massively reorganize the sequence of events and the descriptions that you're telling us, when you're telling us, how you're telling us, the words you're using to describe it all. The scene itself is solid. It's just the sequence that you need to fix.
Let me massage a little bit what Sign is saying, because I agree to an extent, but there needs to be I think a caveat is so I've talked to other published authors, and like one of the things to be very careful with, especially when you're newer to writing,
Never
don't
ask
wanna-
questions.
like
I'm gonna
never ask
disagree.
questions in
In
what
the
context?
summary. Never ask questions in the
Oh.
summary. Don't say, can
Yeah.
he figure out
Yeah.
the
Listen to the
mystery
summary.
before it's too
Um,
late?
Yeah, no, that's but like so it is important to have a hook early in the story, but generally speaking, don't try so hard to where you write like purple prose and spend most of your time
Right.
on like the first couple
Exactly.
pages.
Yeah.
At least just focus on finishing the story and get people like us to like critique it. Because the only thing better than like a half-finished amazing story is an okay story that's done. You know?
Yeah, true.
So
No, 100% true. There is fan fiction I will read solely because it's finished.
Fair.
yeah.
I will say, Sign, I heavily disagree with you on the summary here. There is not too much given away. What's covered in the summary is the first 2 chapters, which is
Yeah.
acceptable. And there is no instance of asking if the character can do it. It's if I was told this was the summary from an up-and-coming noir novel, I would believe it. Like, this
Yeah.
is a good enough summary to hook most people, especially if they like mystery.
It feels too
Like,
wordy and like
no,
you're
no,
going too into
No,
detail.
Sign?
no, no,
It's
no,
not quick and
no,
snappy.
I see where
Sign?
Sign is coming from, but he's not quite right. I think the issue where he's saying it's too wordy is that they aren't. Let me scroll back up. They're giving us the information in the wrong order.
Also that.
Yeah.
That
I
I
was
can agree
more
with. I think Sign is crazy saying it's too wordy because he's gotten so used to writing summaries for fan fictions, which
No,
have
what
to
I
be
was saying is I
snappier.
think where he's coming from, where it
I'm saying
being
it's
too
not
wordy,
snappy.
is that we're not getting information in an order that makes it flow very nicely, so it feels chunky.
Yeah, to delineate, because I'm kind of getting confused if we're talking about like a back of the book summary or the start of the story. The start of the story, I thought there was a good scene there, but they just
Back to
some of
book.
it needs to be rearranged.
No,
Okay, back
we're
of the book,
talking
then
back in
yeah,
the like
whatever.
you
Yeah.
take it off the shelf and you look at the back cover.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, the
we're
back
talking about
cover.
that blurb of text that he shared with the Ivan Quist as a young
Yeah,
detective,
Ivan
that whole
Enquist,
thing.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that just needs to be padded out because I mean a lot of it just kind of reads like a vomit of words. It just needs to be just needs to flow a little bit
Like I
better.
said,
So
it just needs
yeah.
to be reorganized. Like
Right.
both the summary and the start of the book are both good. They just need to have minor amounts of fat trimmed, like that whole list thing from the start of the pithy quote. Like they need to have
Like
little bits here and there trimmed, but mostly everything there is good. It just needs to be reorganized in a pattern that flows better.
yeah, and I mean
Um,
if you're worried about revealing the murder too much, I'd say like especially if you've already established like what the story is. So it could be like, Ivan was learning how to sculpt golems or whatever in the Weaver school when he had heard about a murder. And it's like he met the political elite of the Penroyal family and they challenged him an impossible task. Can he complete it? There, you're kind of giving what's going on without giving away the murder. So like talk around it, like with
and
the
my second
summary.
worry is if the clues on who the murderer is make sense, and if the payoff is worth it, but that requires reading the whole story. That's
Yeah,
fair. As
yeah.
far
I
as
mean,
general advice I would give on that, when it comes to murder mysteries, you can handle it a couple different ways. I mean, there's the Sherlock fashion, in where you give some of the details to the audience. The audience tries to come to their own conclusion, and at the end, Sherlock goes, "Oh, well, you didn't notice the dust on their fingers of their glove, which just so happens to be the same particles of dust located on that book, the book that had blood on it, the blood of the person that died, and the book was only ever touched by that guy who touched it, who to kill them with the book. And you didn't notice that detail because I am smart and on cocaine.
Yeah, Sherlock's a bit of a hard one to do because that's part of the appeal of Sherlock is
Right,
I'm
I'm
not
saying that
taking you
that is a
mhm.
path of if your character is supposed to be very smart and attentive, having in a written form, because I mean, obviously Sherlock was originally a written book. It is possible to do that in the written form, where initially only some details are given to the audience, and you can say that the character is noticing stuff, but you can only give some of
Mhm.
the details to the audience, and then at the end have a big reveal where they go, well, actually, here's all these details that you, the audience, and you, the people in the room with me, missed, where I prove who is the real murderer. That's one way.
So
Another way of doing it
Just don't make it feel
is,
like too much of an ass pull.
yes,
yeah,
well, the
it's
other way of doing it
exactly.
is the psych way. So the psych way is where they have a moment in the story in which the intelligent main character points everything out as he's finding it. He's not going backwards and being like, oh, we'll see all these things you missed. He's going, ah, yes, I can see that book has been moved. I'm looking over here, and I can see actually the blood drips that follow over to that doorway. And when I open this doorway here, I can actually see where the clothes were hung up. These clothes look remarkably like the clothes the butler wears, and I can see a hair of the butler's on it. The butler must have killed him. The butler killed him with the book earlier. I see. So when did the butler come into the room? The butler delivered the sandwich to the mistress of the house at 10:15. Must have meant that he came into the room just before. I see. And you explain
Sneaky.
the entire steps of it all.
Yeah. I think the first approach, like a really easy cut and dry way, I think to describe how you could do the first, like more of a Sherlock approach is
Yeah.
have like a
Well,
lineup of characters with details where some have like details they share with each other, like they could be magic users. They all could
Well,
be from
no,
one
hold on. I wasn't finished yet. Then you
Okay.
have the easier way that doesn't require your character to be massively intelligent or to point out details that you explicitly did not tell your readers. You just have them come to the wrong conclusion at first, where they see some details, they put together what seems to be a fairly logical deduction. They then find out information that either proves them wrong and sets them back on the case once again, having to reevaluate everything, or they were right. And now they just need the proof.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's why there's so many surprise twists. The butler had a twin brother who hates his brother for continuing their family's butlering ways and stealing the mantle of family butlerhood or some stupid shit like that. So he put on his brother's clothes to frame him for the murder. Is that
I think
stupid? Of course, but
a thing you can do, especially to make it interesting, nuanced, and like not have it be a surprise out of left field, is basically make like an Excel spreadsheet or like if it's a Word document outline, like a table where depending on certain parts of the book, you keep track of who would be your potential suspects in the story. You, the author,
actually,
knowing
I
this.
can actually speak on this one as well. I highly recommend the program called Obsidian, which allows you to create note pages and graphs and connect pictures and notes and lines connecting everything. So you can be like, oh, okay, well, in this chapter, or here's this character's bio sheet, and then here's the murder weapon, and he thinks that she did this, and so that's how you can keep track of it a lot easier.
Yeah,
Is you can be like, okay, so here's the murder weapon that he thinks this person used, and this is why, with this arrow pointing towards them, this is their motive for killing them. And here's the motive for this character and the weapon he thinks they used, etc.,
make your crazy work for it.
Yeah,
Make the crazy
Um,
person good.
to tie back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, it sounds like fleshing out your outline a little bit more would be helpful because if you, the author, are not quite sure potentially like what the murder mystery should be, it's going to be very hazardous to try and plant details because they're going to be scattershot. Like maybe they're good, maybe they're not. Whereas if you know, like you'll have characters that are red herrings. Like, is it the butler or is it somebody like maybe there's like a blood stain, like in the story for like a murder scene, where like a butler and another character have the same shoe size, and there the reader has to try to deduce, like, okay, who is it? And so making an outline with a graph, keeping track of these characters that could be suspects, and you can whittle down who over time could be the ones, and you plant evidence until it can only be.
But that's what I'm saying though, is
Yeah.
there's multiple ways of going about it. You can either hide details from the audience so the main character can be right in a dazzling show of intelligence. You can lead the audience along in a dazzling show of intelligence or cleverness where they find the clues and point them out to the audience. Or you can have the audience play along with the murder mystery as they find a bunch of clues, specifically point out those clues, and then in character be like, oh, well, no, that shouldn't matter because she said she was here on this day, so the fact that her plants were trampled today wouldn't have no bearing on blank being killed. But then, later on, that detail might have been important. That actually proves that she did it the whole time, but the character logically discarded that clue that was explicitly told to the audience. So therefore, the audience can actually split their opinion away from the character and come up with their own idea, where they're now challenging the main character along the way, where they think it's this person and these clues, and the main character thinks, oh, it's this person with these clues. So there's a lot of ways to go about doing it. Just read more.
Just to make sure most definitely. I'm gonna link the list of mystery tropes for LeMay, just so you can check this out.
Maybe go track down the best. I don't know, best three best-selling mystery books from each decade over the last 100 or so years.
Yeah.
Because.
And you know what? No, I would say Max is going in the right direction. I would say grab the best selling and see what the worst selling is. Like something that just has terrible.
Well, see, the problem though is with worst selling is you've never heard of it.
Right.
Yeah,
there's that, and then you want to be careful, especially if you're newer, looking at the stuff that's bad, because it'll kind of subconsciously in some way give you bad habits too.
It will, yeah.
Is like my experience. Because when you're more experienced with it, and it's a habit, it can be kind of funny, like a sort of so bad it's good, and you can even in kind of a hipster way see what somebody was trying to do for a story. I'll give you a really good example. Since we were mentioning philosophy stuff, there's this movie called The Primer. I had a friend show me this movie. Basically, it's like a science mystery. It has a time travel thing, and I honestly thought the movie sucked. This was a time where I was smoking when I was watching it, and I literally fell asleep, and my friend got kind of mad. And I was like, well, they just didn't do stuff super well. But me as a writer, I had thoughts for ways it could have improved the story. But if I was trying to show somebody how to write a philosophical story, I would never show them The Primer until they've made a couple, That's just my thought. Everybody's got their own style. So, there's always a caveat or an exception somewhere, but just off the top of my head. The Primer is an interesting movie, though. I mean, I don't know. It's it's unique. I will say that much.
Unique. Okay. As we've not that this has any bearing on you, but as we have discussed several times on this show, you wouldn't know.
Unique does not mean good.
Okay, I mean not fan fiction. I mean it's its own thing. It's its own story.
You're never gonna be unique. No matter what you do, no matter what story you write, you will never be unique.
Okay, I it's hard to explain why.
I know what you're trying to say. Having a unique take isn't the same as being unique. Because your take is going to be informed by the culture around you when you're writing it, your life experiences, what you grew on, what shoulders of giants you're writing from.
Look, yeah, obviously, they gotta have electricity and it's filmed on a camera. It can only be so degree of unique, but as close to the spirit of the word unique as it can be, it is unique. That's what I'd say. And not bad, there's gore and porn, unique. I mean, it's an interesting philosophical film that's unfortunately not done super well and boring, in my opinion. So if you want a philosophical thing that's half cooked, you can see the kernel of an idea, that's one, because it intrigued me enough. I almost wanted to write would be a working version of it. It's hard to explain. You gotta watch it. Again, I feel like a crazy person trying to explain it, because it would, yeah, words.
Oh, also, while we're here, so Sneaky, it looks like Sign rewrote the summary. So why don't we cover that? Because Sign is an accomplished author, but
you fool! I was already rewriting it before you thought of it.
I gave it a 5-minute attempt, and that's what I came up with. I'm sure it can be improved.
I want to be very clear. I didn't mean that in a ooh, Sign thinks I meant that in a one person took a crack at it, but the entire point of this has been having a collective shred everything.
There we go. So like I said, I fucked up that last little bit right there.
Okay. Can I just, for the sake of example, when I mentioned unique, can I at least read the Wikipedia summary for The Primer?
Yeah, hit us.
Plot. 2 engineers, Aaron and Abe, supplement their day jobs with entrepreneurial tech projects working out of Aaron's garage. During one such research effort involving electromagnetic reduction of objects' weight, the two men accidentally discover an A to B causal loop side effect. Objects left in the weight reducing field exhibit temporal anomalies, proceeding normally from A when the field is activated to time B when the field is powered off, then backward from B back to A in a continuously repeating sequence, such that objects can leave the field in the present or at some previous point. Abe refines this proof of concept and builds a stable time apparatus, the box. It's like a primitive time machine, sized to accommodate a human subject. Abe uses this box to travel 6 hours into his past. As part of this process, Abe stays in a hotel room, isolating himself from any communication with the outside world so as to not interact or interfere with the outside world, after which he enters the box, then waits inside the box for 6 hours, thus going back in time 6 hours. Once he exits the box, Abe travels across town, explains the proceedings to Aaron, and brings Aaron back to the self-storage facility housing the box. At the facility, they watch the earlier version of Abe enter the box. I've only read like a third of the summary. It's weird time travel shit. Like it's not even doing the justice for the film. It's trippy. Like
you fool, you've made the classic mistake of putting technobabble bullshit in your summary. Cut it down.
Well, they made a chart.
No, I will say,
I'm
Sign
glad.
did a good. Sign, in a shocking degree of clarity,
Yeah, it is
managed
way
to
too
rewrite a
cerebral.
summary and not make it
100%.
worse.
Honestly, I actually am legitimately impressed because I've only
Yes.
read one thing from Sign so far, and
A
it
massive
ranged
Sign
from
W.
What is this? To that's pretty good.
Hooray!
A legendary
Big
moment.
W.
One that shall never appear again.
Pretty much.
We will. You know what? For next week, this will
This will
this
cancel out the
retroactively
Sign
go
L.
around.
There's no way that's gonna happen. I
Don't
refuse to
worry.
believe that this
I'm
cancel
sure
this
he'll make
L.
another L on Monday or Tuesday.
Exactly.
But anyway, so Sign says in a rewording of the summary, after the death of Marshall Weaver, Marshall Weaver Academy student, under suspicious circumstances, the Emperor's Hand, Lady Pennyroyal appeals to the Inquis family to investigate. A line of Imperial investigators and spies tasked with solving crime involving Weavers. You forgot to capitalize Weavers. Ivan, a newly minted detective of the Inquis family and unable to use Aether.
I would get rid of.
I would say Ivan, a newly minted detective, who is unable to use Aether.
Yeah,
I would say a supernatural detective, like in some way, because like people don't know what Aether is yet, you know.
Well, no, introducing it in the summary is fine. Okay. Again, so long as you're capitalizing it and making it be like, "Hey, guys, this is another big important thing." Accepts the case in hopes of uncovering some clue as to involvement of Lady Pennyroyal and her mother's mysterious death. With some luck and a bit of old-fashioned detective work, he may solve his mother's decade-old cold case and prevent another academy student from meeting an untimely end. Yeah, no, 100% major improvement.
It is a good improvement. The only complaint I would have is that the final sentence would cause people to connect the cold case with the current case, despite it being mentioned literally one sentence prior. Because that's what the human brain tends to do. Unless
and that could be an intentional move on the author's part if he wanted to, say they're connected or imply they're connected when they're not and throw a red herring out there.
Okay. Conversely, red herrings in the summary is usually a bad idea for a mystery novel.
Yeah, fair.
So.
No, it can be a mixed bag if the entire mystery novel is filled with red herrings. That's one thing. Where it's constantly, here's a clue, did it matter? No. Here's a clue, did it matter? No. Here's a clue, did it matter? No. I mean classically, we're going to talk about classic red herring stories. Hardy Boys and not Helen Keller. What the fuck is the woman one?
Something Nancy, I think.
Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew.
That's what it was.
Nancy Drew.
Both of those are classic red herring stories. I was gonna
It's
say
been a
Helen
long
Keller,
night.
so
Leave,
hey, you know.
leave him alone. This is the sort of thing where the summary, that last sentence will work for one type of mystery novel and not so much for another.
Not for
Yeah,
another.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So congratulations, you've
It's
made
very important.
Kroninger's summary, essentially.
Yeah.
I want to point out, by the way, we're only 3 pages in. Out
Yes.
of
23.
Yeah, I noticed that a while ago, but I was like, these are cool conversations. I dig it. So
It'd be funny if the first
Yeah.
conclusion
That
is correct in a story
happens.
like that, one filled with red herrings. I mean, that's why I recommended House MD, because House MD quite literally is the first solution usually ends up being the correct one, but they don't have the proof for it. So instead, they go through the entire episode testing every other solution to ultimately come back with proof where the first one is now viable.
They find the
Or they
solution
have
and
no
work
idea
backwards.
what it is. And then House goes, fuck it, break into their house and find out what they've been doing. And then they come to some solution.
Well, see that's the other. It's a double bluff, double red herring. Where the thing is that House is usually right, but when he's wrong because of a detail he couldn't have known.
Right. A detail that only came up later, like the episode with the dog dying and then the guy dying immediately after, or vice versa.
Right.
I forget.
Or the episode where the guy had I forget what kind of sickness he had. Like he was having like some sort of lung issue, and they just couldn't figure it out. And eventually, it came out that actually he was breaking onto the roof of his apartment complex to illegally
birds,
take
yeah.
care of a bunch of pigeons while not cleaning out their pigeon shit because he was trying to use it as free manure or something for his grow
Yeah.
operation.
Oh,
And
okay, then.
none of that was information they could have ever known anywhere because no one would have ever known he was doing any of that until they broke into his house and found a ladder leading from his window to the pigeons in his weed
the
growing
one-
operation.
The one with the kid mysteriously getting sick, and then, oh, come to find out they drove by a pesticide spraying operation.
Right.
And House's first assumption was it fits for pesticide. Well, everything they're looking at, everything they're seeing in the investigation says no pesticide until they go to the bus driver. Oh, the bus for this one specific day broke down. They had to get a replacement or some shit.
And that
And
bus
yeah,
happened
it
to
was a
have
whole thing.
super mold.
Or something like that, or drove by the sprayer or something.
Yeah. So I mean that's why House is great because House actually, because it has like what was it 11 seasons or something, House lures you
It's
into
a
the
lot.
idea of you knowing how the episode is gonna go and then being like, "Gotcha, bitch." Nope.
Oh, and then it does have the occasional wham episode. Oh,
Yeah, that it does have like the hey, by the way, hope you're ready for some feelings because
They're coming.
yeah.
the metal.
Yeah, I'd
oh
say,
yeah,
like,
the radioactive metal. Yeah. Yep.
I'd say pretty like overall we've covered probably everything LeMay needs to do like moving forward. I think just rearranging a bit of like that start, a couple books that are like points of reference, I think will be really helpful. And then just really meditating on like tropes that he like wants to use, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and revising.
Narrowing down the kind of topics you're going to bring up in the story, generally what you're going to focus on, what's just going to be a plot point that you move on from, etc. Like, don't try and compact so many tropes in. Like you had a list of overarching themes. That was too many fucking themes.
Right.
Especially for the
that.
first book. Yeah, we talked about
Before
that.
I
but,
forget,
Yeah, don't. We
how
did
many
talk about that.
pages? How many pages / words? Like, especially how many words is the story? And on average, how many words are each chapter? Is something worth asking. Because for a noir, there's a
Well-
specit rhythm you kind of want to keep, and
Well,
not
I
that
mean,
always matters,
I'm
but-
scrolling through
gave
these
us-
23 pages, and it's definitely looking a lot like we got a lot of double spaced times 12 font.
What-
so it's like an
what
11-page
LeMay
story.
gave
So it's like a
us-
short story.
What
Yeah.
LeMay gave us was 6,000
Okay, well
words,
then that's fine.
split between 2 chapters, roughly. So
Which, I mean, is good enough.
Okay.
2,500 to
Okay.
3,000 per chapter, which honestly chapters can be as short or as long as you want them. They're
It's
weird
more
like
chapters are more
that.
mental breaks. It's more like a
Yeah.
noir because you want to keep a certain tension and like
Yeah.
a momentum. You want to keep it on the shorter end, like let's say 2,500 to 3,000 words. Which I'm guilty of blowing past that myself. So I'd be lying if I didn't say I did that in my own noir writing. But then similar thing after about let's say 100,000 words and like a noir like novel, probably want to try to wrap it up at some
I
point because people are gonna be like,
I don't think I'm gonna read a noir novel that's over 50 to 60K personally.
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
100
Like.
seems like overkill.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because like you look at something like Neuromancer, like how many words is it? I'm gonna throw a number at like 75,000.
Yeah, a noir
47K.
story definitely kind of
That's
maxes out at
that's
maybe
pretty
80K at most. I mean, you're looking
yeah.
at like a 60K noir
Neuromancer's
story.
Yeah,
80,000 words.
LeMay's is doing 47K for this first book.
Okay, so it's like
That's
a
pretty
novella
respectable
kind
for
of
a
That's
thing.
first
a
noir.
novella, yeah.
Yeah, 2,000, 3,000. That's good. I just thought to ask because people sometimes forget to ask about that, and pacing is really important depending on the book you're writing. Because people take like an epic fantasy pacing for what's like an action story, and so
Well,
Yeah,
it'd be
okay,
don't
now
get
interesting.
hang
that.
on. So, yes, it's a noir story, but you've also got to factor in the fact that it's magic. You've got to choose scenery and do world building. That's going to inflate everything.
Well,
That
It can, but here's
not
47K towards
that's not
action,
no, you don't need to
sure.
no,
here's the
you don't really
question
need
though:
to
is how is it high fantasy or like lower fantasy? Because it sounds
It
like the
sounds like
magic's a
lower
little grounded.
fantasy.
Yeah.
if it's
So if it's more like a
1920s with
scientific,
magic, it's probably pretty grounded, so there's no need to choose scenery.
Juice it.
yeah.
You would want to do at least a little bit.
I mean,
Well, you want
counterpoint,
to,
that feels like author and reader preference.
yeah. I mean, because you
Maybe.
want to
Like
avoid
the first scene definitely needs more sprucing up, as was extensively covered in just the
right.
first 2 pages of chapter 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
And like I think just focusing more on like kind of covering the fundamentals of just establishing more sensory details and stuff would be good. Because I just
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't want LeMay to get too caught up in the mechanics of their magical system. I'd rather a character
No.
kind of like I'd rather it's explained they're magical and they shoot out a fireball rather than like here's the Vaz rune, and the Vaz rune is part of the called family of
Too
arcane ether. And it's like,
complicated.
dude, yeah, like
yeah,
it'd be like that Wikipedia from Primer, you know?
we're probably not going to cover it tonight, but in chapter 1, there's a pretty decent covering of people that can use Aether have an extra organ of some sort. People who can't are missing it, and it lets them draw in and use energy, and
Just cover that
that's
there. I mean,
about it.
just
And
like just
they draw patterns in the air with their fingers.
LeVay, I mean, to give you like a gross simplification, but I feel like it could kind of work is like some people are magic users and some aren't, you know, and there's a hierarchy naturally because of that. And that's where you could explore the social aspect of the eugenics and the genetic like component without having to get mired in all the mechanics of why that happens.
But
Um,
like I said, they didn't mire themselves down in mechanics. They kept it
that's
short and
good.
simple and concise.
That's
Like I
good.
said, in the first chapter, you don't have an Aether heart. Okay, cool. There's an organ that lets people use the magic. The
Yeah,
magic
I can't
is
see it.
drawn in and expelled using patterns that you draw in the air with your fingers. Okay, cool. That's all I need to know. That's it. That's all
Exactly.
that's needed.
And that's because that is kind of a trap with fantasy that can happen sometimes is a thing I try to avoid because I love world building. It's probably the thing I tend to focus on the most, but you can get what's called world builder's disease, and you definitely want to avoid that. And especially a fantasy or science fiction setting, which is a little bit of more towards the fantasy realm.
Yeah. Um.
Now, in what is unfortunately going to
mm,
be a kind of a dissenting opinion here, um, it is good that you've got structure in there, and the structure that you have is good because some people that are very successful with their fantasy writings, in this case, I'm going to bring up Jim Butcher, author of the Dresden Files, and Brandon Sanderson.
Yes.
Both of them have magic systems. Sanderson makes the rules of his magic systems very clear to understand and distills them well. right?
Yeah.
There's a thing called Mistborn, and there's people who they can drink certain metals and do magic. And then he tells you
Gunpowder
specifically
wizard.
what,
Mhm.
right? You consume this metal and you can use this power. And there's 12 metals and there's 12 powers. People who can use all 12 are called allomancers. And if you can only use one of them because someone in your family line was an allomancer and you didn't get the magic super gene, then and you can use steel, you're a steel pusher because that's what you do. You push off of steel. You got iron, you're an iron puller because you pull on iron. That kind of shit, right? Versus someone like Butcher, who, while he tells you the way his magic system works, the way his magic system works is very loose because it's based on intent. It's based on what the magic caster wants to happen, and they're quite literally enforcing their will onto reality through the power of magic, through the power of creation itself.
I mean, yeah,
So
like based off what
LeMay
you're
actually brings up
describing.
a good thing here.
Okay.
So LeMay brings up that the reason why these casting gloves that could replace weavers aren't in mass use is because they're new and they have lots of problems. So this is a
Yeah.
Boruto issue, a famous story you see. Boruto,
Oh,
you know,
God.
with Boruto's dad being the prequel story.
Oh, I
Is that
hate it.
Naruto?
Yeah.
Yes.
Shut the
What's
fuck up,
okay?
Sneaky.
That alone deserves a
That's a
slap,
deep
you
cut.
bastard.
So in
Are
you
Boruto,
Boruto's dad, Naruto?
so in Boruto,
actually,
they actually
before,
have a
hang on.
technology called the chakra glove or some bullshit, which allows them to capture a
Uh,
jutsu in the glove and then use it. And Boruto steals it at some point, and it's whatever.
so
Um,
they took
so
they took the sealing scrolls and applied them
yeah,
to shrinking seal
Yeah, it
for
was the
whatever
same thing
reason.
Jiraiya did when he sealed Itachi's fire back.
yes.
Yeah,
Except
way back when.
Jiraiya
they
was
did,
an advanced seal master and not some fucking kid who
Yes,
just stole a glove.
yeah.
exactly.
No, he didn't steal it. He was given it
Well,
because it was meant to be a public
he
demonstration of the technology.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Jiraiya didn't
So
automate the process. The gloves did.
yeah, that's what they did. They managed to mass produce it at a scale that had been previously unfathomable in that world.
But yeah, as science says, when you have a new piece of equipment that could potentially upturn the entirety of the civilization's enforcement of violence, you need to have really good reasons as to why this glove isn't in wider use. And it having a lot of problems is one of those solutions. You know, it's sort of like if you've ever played a hardcore mode in a video game and the video game's like, okay, here's your 12 debuffs, choose 3. Lots of
The fuck
problems is
you.
one of those.
Yeah.
Um,
I do think it's worth noting that the initial summary did mention they were experimental, and
Yeah.
again,
yes, they did,
Fair,
but
if people did the required reading, it does mention this is a
I can't see it.
prototype
So
that barely works.
yeah,
right,
I only
but
saw
well,
whatever's on
but
the
the
stream.
important
So
part there is so the problem with the idea of it having lots of problems is he's going to be relying on this device to make everyone else think that he is an Aether caster like them. And if this device
Yeah.
has problems, you have to devote plot time to him
well,
either coming up with solutions in class. Because again, you can't just
here.
throw that out there and be like, oh yeah, well he had problems in class and he just got around them. Now because you've
What?
introduced the fact that this device
Don't.
has problems, you actually
Well,
have to
let
show the
me
problems occurring.
No,
something
You
I
have
should
to keep up with it.
emphasize that was kind of that it was alluded
Mhm.
to, but it wasn't given a hard name for it. Is LeMay needs to figure out if it's a hard magic system or a soft magic system
Well,
because
yes.
the Mistborn stuff would be hard magic, the Dresden Files would be soft magic. And the thing I want to emphasize, so like Mistborn is a 210,000 word book. It has a hard magic system, whereas Dresden Files it's an 87-ish, I think, thousand word book, but it's
Yeah.
Well, the
soft
first
magic.
one, it does.
Yeah, Stormfront.
get
Yeah.
progressively much longer. But
Right now, this gloves and can't handle high-level patterns, and it's slow to use. I mean, those are great drawbacks for someone who is infiltrating the academy in a short term. But what I'm saying here is, if you have
the
drawbacks,
gloves aren't made to trick people, though. They're made for people
they
who
are.
can't use
No,
ether.
in the original summary written by LeMay, the original summary says, Aetherless Ivan to infiltrate the school as a student using the experimental gloves basically as cover. Because he's going to a school specifically for teaching people how to use the magic as a martial soldier. So if he's going to infiltrate the school as a student without the ability to manipulate Aether, he's going to be using this pair of gloves to make it look like he is doing what everyone else is doing.
Yes, but it sounds like the gloves weren't made explicitly for that purpose.
They
were made to try to,
They were made to replace people with having Aether. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is my point, though, is that if you are going to have the gloves, because like you could have it without having issues. So like if you are going to have one of the issues being there is lots of problems, it's an experimental device, sometimes it goes off or does the wrong magic or backfires or something. If you're going to have that be a plot point for these gloves as to why they aren't more widely produced already, then you need to keep track of that shit. It needs to happen in both during combat when he is, having confrontations with people, and it also needs to be happening during his lessons. And now, here's the thing, though, is you can use him having this specific failure during a lesson. Like, okay, guys, cast Fireball. He goes to cast Fireball. It blows back on him. And so then he learns, okay, it's going to blow back like this when I cast Fireball. So then, later on, he's grappling with the villain. He's like, haha, Fireball. And the villain's like, oh, I'll dodge this way. And he's like, oh, the back blast gets him instead. Because Ivan, knew how the glove would fail when doing a certain spell. And he was able to later then use that tactically, showing both growth and him overcoming the issues inherent in the glove. Now, you can also bypass this, not have the glove fail, and just be like, oh, well, right now the glove is made by this one crazy inventor, and no one's really figured out a way to mass produce it yet, and so he's only made like 5 gloves.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of this is, if we got chapter 2, like, a little bit of that's covered, as far as its origins go, at least.
Sure.
The problem is we don't have the full story.
Yes.
So
I know, but I'm just saying as a general perspective, when you are writing technology that's supposed to be experimental, and I see people be like, oh, this is an experimental piece of tech. It never fails. It does everything better than whatever it's replacing, and it's super easy to use. It's like, okay, well then why the fuck isn't everyone using it? Because I want my main character.
Quotes. I always thought of, if you ever watch like the Gundam animes or whatever, there, at least it's been a while since I watched it, but it'd be like there's an experimental Gundam that's just like objectively better than like what the other dudes are using. Yep. It's like every season it's just a new experimental one.
Every time.
Well, I mean, BattleTech actually does this really well. Is that there's a bunch of clan bunkers with all of these, clan era battle
Starleague,
mechs.
not clan.
Starleague. My bad. Starleague. There's a bunch of Starleague bunkers with Starleague mechs, and like one bunker might have one working mech, but that one working mech is so fucking better than everything else. It's insane. And it's a complete game changer on the battlefield because everyone else is running around with their fucking Mad Max tier scrap mechs. And this guy has got like a fucking pristine precision factory nano scale made mech that has fucking heat sinks that are so good you can fire on full auto every single fucking gun on your mech for an entire day and it won't heat up.
I would say, to put it in context that people understand now, it's like when I roll out a brand spanking new, freshly up to date, top of the line U.S. Army M1 Abrams, and my opponent has a T-95.
No one really knows what a T-95 is.
It's a T-95 Russian tank, Sneaky.
I'm
Yeah.
aware of what a T-95 is. My point is that Atin said, let me put this as an example that everyone would know.
No,
proceeds to cite
an example
obscure
that
Russian tank.
The autists in this chat find.
That wasn't your statement, though. It
You're
was
right.
that everyone
You're right.
would
I needed to
understand.
revise it.
Also,
But I
you
was
know,
thinking-
some people don't have the tank autism.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
well,
thinking
'cause
fun
I'm
of 'em.
thinking, well, because I was thinking T-95. You're meaning, let's see here. Double checking here, because I had to
Yeah.
look it up.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the Armada?
What?
I'm like looking here.
No.
What in the world are you talking about? now?
Here, I'm
What?
double checking. I'm looking at T-95 tank Russian. I was trying to figure out specifically.
He's talking
The one
about
from
this
1988. Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
it's like a Korean War like era.
Yeah.
From the
Okay.
80s.
Because there's yeah.
Yeah, okay, let me just make this real simple. A modern day tank versus a tank from World War II.
Okay, because I
Sure,
was in the army,
sure.
and that
If
was
you-
kind of
if you s-
gobbledygook to me.
Well,
'Cause
no, I
there's-
mean like a
it's-
T-95, an M1 Abrams and a T-95, those are real tanks.
I know, but T-95. I mean, there's American tanks that could have that designation. I'm being pedantic. It's late, but
T-95 is the one it's most commonly known by. Anyway, point is, sure, if you send a bunch of World War II tanks against a modern tank, they can eventually kill it. But you
I
will
think that was
lose-
actually proposed, and it was actually it required a certain level of barrel size / ammo type, because
Yes.
quite literally
Yeah,
there
they
was a
needed a
level
big
of
boy to do it.
ammo penetration that just wouldn't.
Yes,
like-
there's a yes, it's a metaphor. All metaphors break down, because it's not quite the perfect comparison.
No, I get you.
because
Yeah.
A Star League era mech, it doesn't have it's not like everybody in BattleTech is stuck with autocannons and machine guns, and all the Star League era mechs have lasers. It's the Star League era mech has a better laser.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is like, the reason why it works with Star League mechs is an AC-20 is still an AC-20, and the Star League mech doesn't have magically better armor. It has better armor, but not magically better. A
it
giant
has armor
fucking
that's
hole is
lighter.
still a giant fucking hole. It has
Yeah.
better heat sinks, but it doesn't have like magical god tier heat sinks of endless proportion. It
Yeah.
still has to cool down. It still has ammo reserves. It still has, complications to its operation that can be overcome through just sheer numbers. Hell,
Yes.
we fucking did that to the goddamn Germans in World War II. Yeah, oh, wow, you blow up a Sherman. Have 20 more.
Yeah.
there also were logistical constraints for why the Sherman was fielded compared to like the Königstiger or whatever. It was
Yes.
mostly the Americans had to ship it across an ocean, and
Yes, we
often.
know. But
Yeah,
again,
I mean,
it's all metaphors break down.
The
point
American
is
logistics train is amazing. Fight
The
yeah,
point
because I was about to
is-
say there was a D-Day before D-Day that was actually failed because of
Yes,
logistics.
right. But the point of the statement is that yes, if we threw enough Shermans at a Tiger or a Panzer IV or whatever, sure, I might lose 4 Shermans to do it, but I can afford to lose 4 Shermans because I have 20.
Yeah.
And you
Well,
only
and I mean
have
the
5
designation for a Sherman, it's kind of incomplete because a Tiger was kind of designed for tank v tank combat, whereas a Sherman was more of an infantry support vehicle. Often
Yes.
Shermans just wouldn't engage a Tiger if they didn't have to. They just called in artillery or a
Yeah,
Mustang
yeah,
to take it
yeah,
out.
Correct.
yeah.
Because
yeah.
the Sherman was over there armed with like a 10-foot extension that had chains on it whipping the beach for mines,
Right.
or a 10-foot bridge
You
extender
mean
so
the
that it could get
funnies.
the funny one, right? So that it could
The
get people
funnies,
across
yes.
the river,
Right.
or the gully, or they put literal pontoons on it so they could float it onto the beach so people could hide behind it and not die to machine gun fire. And as long as it got to the beach and people could hide behind it, it really didn't have to do nothing else.
Yeah, because no, I mean, it is interesting because, like, in a fictional setting, it is cool to take like lessons that like were learned in like technological context and like how do you incorporate it in a story. Because I do think even like the Tiger Tank, like mentioned, I tend to think of like the Tiger Tank as a classic example of what's called like a white elephant technology of it's like too over engineered for the problem it's
Yes.
solving.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like
Yes.
like a good example, this could be a rough analogy, but in the US, like the F-35, like the amount of money that went into developing
Oh
the
my god.
F-35 for whatever
The
obstacles it might go
F-22.
against. Yeah, exactly. And to where we might have just been better off just mass producing like F-16s or F-15s, you know? I mean, I'm not a pilot,
Yes.
so it's a little out of
Yeah.
my
Well,
expertise realm, but
also to build off what Sign said here is that oh, Germans on horses, realizing the Americans are bringing in jeeps and shit. Honestly, one of the biggest morale damages the Axis received in general was when the Americans started making beachheads and then started shipping in shit like chocolate cake and ice cream, and everyone
Yeah.
was like,
Ah, yes, the ice
Oh.
cream ships.
"Oh fuck, their logistics
yeah,
is
Yeah.
really good."
As
right.
as
Yeah.
as has been discussed, we went to the Middle East and we built KF fucking C there because our
Burger
boys
Kings.
deserve to have KFC just while they're killing people.
It's
Right.
true. McDonald's
Yeah.
and
Right.
KFC
Yeah.
in the
The whole
Pentagon.
reason
Burger King.
that they eat chicken on Christmas in Japan is because we imported fried chicken there
Yeah.
to our military bases, which eventually became a thing that they understood that Christmas was a thing and that you eat chicken on Christmas. Well, where can I get chicken? Well, the only place is the KFC. And that's why, right, it's this weird culturally anachronistic thing, which is why now you see Saber Alter with a KFC bucket in the Fate Grand Order Christmas events.
Yeah. I mean, was it another thing? It was like
I mean,
chocolate as well as when we were shipping. It was like Italy, and we were like, "Oh, Italians will bring you food," because the whole defection thing, and
Yeah.
that's why spam is actually a huge thing in Italy, is because we gave them so much fucking spam in American culture that like they had an entire generation that just grew up eating spam.
Ugh.
Which truly the greatest of our Geneva Convention violations.
True.
Yes.
But yeah,
I
chocolate
thought
as well.
I
We were like
had
shipping in chocolate and just giving chocolate out to people, and everyone was like going like, "What the absolute fuck, America?"
so
Oh yeah,
I
we were bribing German prisoners. Sorry, real quick, with cigarettes
Yeah.
Yeah.
because everybody got their cigarette ration.
Yeah,
We
no,
ate
that's
so many
true.
fucking
I
cigarettes,
it is something like interesting. Like even the Soviet Union, which did a huge chunk of the fighting against the Nazis, millions of people dying. That so
Yeah.
much of their supplies, lend lease. There are certain statistics I've read where I'm gonna throw a number out. It's something like 80% of certain kinds of like jet, like well not jet, but like fighter plane like fuel that
Yeah.
the Soviets were using was from America. You know?
Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah,
Yes.
we
yeah.
we were
Yes.
lending out so much equipment. It was insane.
Not
That
just
was
equipment, but
that was part of the
food and
reason
other
we actually
things.
did so much morale damage because we were supplying not just the American war effort, we were basically single-handedly supplying the American war effort,
the British, the French, and
the
the
British war
Soviets.
effort,
Soviet.
the Soviet war effort, and the French resistance, and the Italian resistance, and then when we finally get over there, everyone was thinking they must be exhausted, and we're importing
Nope.
chocolate and ice cream, and they went, oh fuck.
And
I mean,
not only
related-
that, we're also fighting in the Pacific and the Atlantic at the same time, and in Africa. It's like,
I
oh,
have to mention, if you ever read like because there's two different kinds of histories. There's pop history and there's actually what happens. It's like an archives. You have to like actually dig for to figure
oh no,
out
I mean,
the real.
Atin and I have
The real
gone through the American history of the wars before,
hell
and
yeah.
it's insane.
It's
Like, we found out
Oh,
that
yeah.
in Vietnam, we dropped so much napalm. There was enough napalm in all of the bombs that we dropped during the War of Vietnam to cover the entirety of the landmass of Vietnam in 13
right.
inches of napalm.
Right. And that's not even including like Cambodia and Laos, where we
Yeah,
dropped
no,
so
that
many
was
bombs.
literally
Like,
just the officially recorded amount of napalm used in Vietnam.
you know,
By the way,
there
Sneaky,
was.
don't you mean American skincare?
Yeah.
Have you guys
Oh.
okay on the note of Vietnam? Have you guys heard of what are called? I believe they're called green light teams. They're part of SOG.
Yeah, oh, yep.
So SOG,
Yep.
yeah, that shit unbelievable for people listening. So SOG is like the special forces, like uber special forces that works with like the CIA, like level of like
Special
crazy
What are
shit.
you
operations
talking
group.
about?
Yeah.
They're called Search and Gather. They,
Of course,
they,
yeah.
yeah, they just did scouting work. What are you talking about, special
green
forces?
green light teams for people listening it was guys that are supposed to go behind enemy lines and combine two sections of a nuclear device, and then they'd get the fuck out of there so it could detonate.
Yeah.
They never used it, but they wanted to like really bad, and they would like constantly be like, "Hey, can we like detonate this nuke?" And it's like, "No, not yet." But it almost happened a couple of
Detonate the
occasions.
nuke.
Wouldn't that
But,
suck? You're some like James Bond dude, and you got like a nuke, and you're like in the plane, like ready to go, and it's like, sorry, you can't do it.
well,
James,
I mean, other
you can't set off
fucking
the nuke.
insane shit that I remember that from. This is actually on a podcast as well. We looked up like equipment stats in World War II.
Oh,
Because
Jesus,
the
yeah.
author was making some stupid fucking claim in like a crossover story or something, like World War II Germany went to like some other country in fantasy fandom, and like they're like, oh, the Germans would like overwhelm them with their tanks or something, and so we ended up looking like World War II stats up, and it turns out that America deployed more equipment than literally everyone else in the war combined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like,
That was
oh,
there was a whole thing. We became a manufacturing
hey, it
country.
wasn't just like, oh,
quickly.
more than all of the allies combined. It was no, everyone else in the
Yeah.
war combined, we deployed more.
Yeah.
I noticed the Beyond Racism dude, Robert E. Lee 2.0, said it's like late. Something I wanted to mention before I forgot is in a story with like technology, with like what LeMay's doing. I'm curious. So tying this into the World War II like
Yep.
discussion is the type, like the how advanced and the quantity of technology is going to be intimately connected to the industrial productive capacity of that society. Like if you look
Obviously,
at the Germans, yeah, like I find it interesting because sometimes if people are like, wearaboos or like they're obsessed with like Nazi Germany, they're like, oh, the Germans had like 20 different tanks. It's crazy. And I'm like, well, yeah, because they were a hyper corporate fascist society where each
have you
corporation
ever
wanted
seen
their
the
own
War
fucking tank.
Thunder tank tree for America?
Oh, also,
Mm.
the other reason they needed 20 different kinds of tanks was because their resources were incredibly thin,
Mhm.
right? We made the Sherman, and
We
the
made a
Sherman the
lot
best
more
tank?
than the Sherman. We deployed a lot of fucking stupid tanks, and then we
I'm
settled on the Sherman.
aware. My
Mhm.
point is that you could make a Sherman for just about every situation. There
Oh,
were
the
German
yeah.
tanks, like the Stug, that didn't
Mhm.
even have an articulated turret.
Yeah.
The Stug was literally, it was a
It was
good tank, but it was the cheapest possible good tank they could make.
and it was like factories they looted in the Czech Republic, and it was that specific pattern they were like specialized for. Is my
They
understanding
were
too.
like
It's like
hammering.
Yeah.
I know
weird.
they made
Yeah.
also like armored skirts for their vehicles, where there was like they were using like scrap metal at one point for like the armored
Yeah.
Yeah.
skirts. And
But related to all this, like, so your Magitech like gloves, this Weaver character will have explaining, especially in a 1920s setting, like if there's like I would caution if you're gonna do a hard magic system, because again, you're gonna get into like Brandon Sanderson territory for like your word
yeah,
count. But like trying to explain the limits of the technology and if it's experimental, explain maybe like an institution that's like kind of creating these things, I would say like in your outline for your character strengths and weaknesses, mention specifically the strengths of this glove, but also weaknesses, just so you know
Well,
subconsciously
not
while you're
not
writing,
only
you know?
that, the strengths and weaknesses of the magic and how the magic system operates. Because it's like, you know, what if you have a fucking water mage who washes the blood away?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what then? You know, what if you have an earth mage that buries the corpse so it looks like, you know, they overturn the entire area so it looks like, you know, an earth mage was just practicing and not a corpse burial? What
Right.
if they have a fire mage that burns the evidence to ash? And so you don't have any, because classical evidence of fire is not the fire itself, it's the chemicals used in the fire. Oh, did they use acetone? Did they use gasoline? Did they use diesel? You know, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can start to source where they might have got it from. Oh, if they use diesel, then check local gas stations, check local trucks. Did it, you know, did they use gasoline? Check, do the same. If they use acetone, did anyone buy lighter fluid recently from a local hardware store? You know, check in with those places. You know, um, there's a lot of things you can do for fire that would leave traces behind of how it started, how it went, etc. And what if they're a fire mage? Maybe they burnt the clothes involved, and they burned
Mhm.
it to ash, and then swept the ash away, and now you don't have any evidence at all of any fire because they used magic. Um, you know,
Or
if they
even,
use
right,
wind
you
to
get people
shield
working
the area
together.
from sound. Yeah,
Yeah, I would
or
say.
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
you have multiple mages
Yeah.
working together,
because, like, for
and
instance, like Sneaky just said, right? My first thought was, right, you have a guy who burns things to ash. Well, then, but that's gonna scorch the shit out of the ground. But you have the Earth Mage there, who, oops, I was doing some Earth Mage practice, and I just so happened to, right, and the piece of earth that someone might look at that was scorched clean and practically glassed and vitrified, oops, that somehow ended up a mile below. Oops, how did that happen?
yeah. So you have to, whenever you're writing a murder mystery story, you have to, you know, ask these sorts of questions. If they used a gun to kill the person, how did no one hear the gun? Was there a thunderstorm going on that day? You know, et cetera, et cetera. Where if there's a shell casing on the ground. I remember in the Hardy Boys book one time, I think there was a gun involved in one of the murders, and they solved the murder because they found a shell casing on the ground.
Yeah.
And they managed to figure out that it was like a revolver, and there's only one person in the area that had a revolver, and so it's like, oh, well, he did it. Um, and so you have to do the same thing, but now you have to include magic, because now you're not just doing a medieval fantasy where you can be like, oh, well, all I have to worry about is swords, arrows, and magic. Now you're in the 1920s, so you have to worry about guns, you have to worry about blades, you have to worry about magic, you have to worry about, you know, good old-fashioned methods such as strangling them or etc. And
Could be
the ways you
poison.
could dispose, you know, poison, the way you could dispose of the evidence of anything involved, like, oh, you know, normally poison would leave residue or on the sink or something if they poured it, you know,
Mhm.
away or in the trash, search the trash for the poison. But what again? What if they just set it on fire? What if they hyper diluted it with the water? You know, what
Yeah.
if they use the elements of magic to get rid of evidence? How does your character
Here's one.
handle that?
Um, it could also be if you explain a little bit how these Magitech gloves work. You could have something like, let's say, I'd have to look up what metals were available and understood in the 1920s. But let's say it's like palladium, like some really expensive, like rare metal to kind of
Well, I mean,
fit,
they
like
had
for the
stuff like
setting.
aluminum.
Yeah.
Yeah,
LeMay
and
can't hear this,
so
by the way. Ad break just started.
Oh,
oh, okay.
rip.
Um, rest in pepperoni. Well, I'll type it out, but to share with you guys, I'll just take a metal like palladium because it's really expensive. It sounds cool if you type it like in a story, you know, like so on and so forth. And it'd be so expensive, even if they could try to mass produce it. There's not enough palladium on the planet to mass produce it. So you kind of solve an industrial power creep sort of
Right.
problem. But it
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
be maybe if it gets used too much, like a too powerful spell, it like burns out and it leaves like a
Oh,
residue. You know, it could be like a
yeah, never
smell or
mind.
like
Yeah.
a
Okay.
like a magical
LeMay's on
trace. You
YouTube,
know.
not Twitch.
True, yeah.
Need to get tab open for that.
So, so I don't know if LeMay heard that, if there was like an
No,
ad
they
break
did.
or
LeMay's
whatever.
saying they
they
could
did.
hear,
Okay.
so.
They did.
Okay. Oh yeah, I just see that. So I would say if you can think of like a little bit, again, you don't have to like describe a blueprint for the reader. In fact, that would kind of bore them. But it could be a
Yeah.
key detail, like even something simple like an alloy of gold or something like
Well,
that.
and not only that, like
Just-
to again harken
just
back
make it
to
bold,
what I
just
said earlier about the
tiny.
debuff chart. You know, if it's artisanal, like only 5 were made, only 10 were made, or only 1 can be made a year because only one dude knows how to really make them because he's keeping the secret to himself. Because you know, like this was actually a major problem back in the day with blacksmiths, is that blacksmiths would come up with a means of working metal and then wouldn't fucking tell anyone. Because they were like, well, I am the best at working the metal now in the area because I figured out this secret.
Yeah, can you blame them?
And well,
Makes
no,
sense.
but like we discovered tempering like hundreds of times. Because every time the blacksmith died, they would take the secrets with them if they didn't pass it on to the apprentice. And so then the apprentice would have to rediscover tempering. They would have to rediscover folding. I mean, not rediscover. I mean, obviously folding was kind of obvious, but like, there's like, oh, marble makes for good flux. If you didn't know marble made for great flux, then your folding would be using subpar flux, and you would get a worse product out of it. And you know, so there's like a whole bunch of little tips and tricks and crazy things. Like the Vikings made these insane swords,
The Wolfbirds?
because the wolf arts, because they used clay furnaces, single-use clay furnaces, where they encased the sword completely and basically like charcoaled the sword with this clay furnace.
And
And
what would be really cool for like the university is if they do try to hermetically seal that knowledge about how to make these gloves too, in addition to it being a pain in the ass, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
no, like again, this is one of those things. That's the kind of thing. Sneaky brought this up earlier. Things that can disrupt the ruling class's ability to perpetuate violence. It's not exactly what he said, right? But
yeah, it is.
that's really important because these gloves are one of the most terrifying things ever. Right? You got to understand that in the world you're creating, there are people that can use magic and there are people that can't. And that's you can or you can't. And this glove upends all of that. Because even if it only makes a normal person a shitty mage, it makes them a mage.
Yeah. And
A
as we
great
all
example
know,
of
eventually everything will be improved upon.
Yeah, a great example of how different things can upset a ruling class's ability to maintain violence is the Powder Mage series by Brian McLean,
Yep.
wherein
Classic.
you are set in basically revolutionary France. But there's magic, right? You have your stereotypical fantasy mages. They touch the else and they can call down lightning and fire and giant blades of wind, and a country's military power is still deeply reliant on how powerful their mages are because uh, guns and artillery, those are really cool and they're really good at helping normal people kill other people, and they can let normal people kill mages, but mages can do things like enchant cannonballs or put up barriers that stop entire walls of bullets so that your infantry can get a charge off, that kind of stuff. And then along comes a different kind of mage, and these are mages that can use gunpowder for magic, so they can do things like be 7 miles away, and if they have a barrel of gunpowder next to them, they can fire a bullet, and then they can just keep using magic to make the bullet go further. And the normal mage, all the way over there, well, he can't do anything to defend against that because the bullet hits him before he can hear it. Or they can do things like literally bend a bullet around the wall, or the enemy's charging us. I'm going to use my magic to set off every single one of their gunpowder satchels.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's always something you have to be cautious about, and you have to think heavily about. and like I said, it's the debuff chart. Pick 3 debuffs, and it excuses pretty much anything as to why this object doesn't show up in the hands of others. And you can then even go on to make interesting plot points from that. Maybe the next enemy in his murder mystery does have one of these gloves, and it's like, oh shit, how the fuck did he get that? How compromised is the government? How compromised, like what's going on here? Maybe the scientist gets kidnapped. Something happens. Yada yada yada. There's a lot you can do with anything you introduce. It's just you have to be careful and think ahead. And I'm not saying you need to get super intricate, and learn economies, and learn this. It's just think about the general stuff of, if I went back in time to the 1400s and I introduced them to the M1 Abrams, would that change anything?
Yeah, no.
Just a bit.
No, I don't think it changed anything. How much gas and how many rounds does that Abrams have in it anyway?
I mean, yeah, not a lot, but again, it's less of this technology will, triumph instantly over everything, and you'll rule the world with a single Abrams, and more.
It's not what you can directly do; it's what you can get out of it by reverse engineering.
Well, not only that, it's just raw understanding. Humans are really great at this. Is once they know something is possible, we can replicate it. Like I've seen, like there's the whole thing on prisoners where the prisoners using gum and plastic forks are able to make working crossbows that can kill people using gum and plastic forks because they know the principles of a crossbow. Because it's possible, so they can reverse engineer it, and that's just humans. Once we know that rifling makes bullets more accurate, we put that shit on everything. Once we know that fin stabilizers make cannons even stronger, we put that shit on everything. Once we know the idea of ablative armor, we put that shit on everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the direct threat of the weapon itself. It's just the raw knowledge of it being possible. I would love to see some fucking wooden battle tanks coming out of the 1400s now.
Dude, the Leonardo da Vinci, there's the cone like shit.
Yeah,
not even the cone. He just sees the modern like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah. Listen, Windmill Gundam's about to get a lot weirder.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
But yeah,
the main
so
battle
anyway,
tank of it.
It's 12:15, so I think it's a good time to close up, gentlemen.
Actually, there's one suggestion I want to make to LeMay,
Yep, sure.
which there's a fight scene in like 2 pages,
and
for some reason Ivan decides to fisticuff the man that points fingers.
Right.
Well, LeMay, as a general rule, I love punch characters, but in a noir world, he's going to learn how to grapple. Weaver's finger is a deadly weapon. That means first priority is disarming. That's probably going to mean breaking the finger the moment it's pointed.
True.
So he's not going to sit there and punch him. He's going to tackle him at the waist, mount him, savagely beat his face and chest in until he's unconscious, dead, or incoherent, and then break every joint to make sure he can't move those arms to make the patterns. Because so far, you made it very clear they have to draw a pattern to do the magic. So I would consider having that addressed at some point if you don't want to make that change in book 1.
Carry a hammer to break hands and fingers.
Yeah, like
we had a bingo card for that.
Point 1, the illegal weaver has pointed their finger at me. Point 2, I have now torn that finger off.
Yes.
The weaver has been has discharged his finger. It has been disfingered. Yeah.
We didn't read far enough to see it, but was the prose like good? Because sometimes fight scenes would be too like over described.
No, the fight scene was actually reasonably well handled.
It was actually reasonable because it didn't get too prosy. My only complaint was simply that in a world where waving the fingers, the dangerous weapon. You
Right.
settle for a boxing match instead of just grabbing that arm and breaking that 90 degrees the wrong way.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
fact,
you
a-
can't
if
wave
this,
those fingers if you don't have no arm.
I
in
will say
fact,
this is being a little technical, but like if the character is a caster, he should know wiggling a finger is vulnerable, so it should be like an arrogant kind of characterization too, for that to make logical sense. I'd just suggest as
well, and
well.
here's just the thing, right? If this is a family that's long had people doing investigations, uh,
Detaining illegal weavers at that.
They should
detaining
have a
illegal weavers,
family hand-to-hand art for
they
dealing
yeah
Yeah,
they
yeah,
should have,
specifically
they
with
should
them.
have an anti-magic art. Yeah.
or if not as, or if it's not a family secret, it should be something that, like, every regular soldier is required to learn at least a little bit of the finger fucking martial art, because you never know when you might have to fight a weaver.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. More grappling. You can ask anyone
Sign,
here. I'm a big
control
fan of
yourself.
characters that go unarmed, but
Yes. Yes.
Noir's a little more grounded than
Yeah.
general fantasy. So in that case, I want to see the anti-Weaver force making use of what they
I
know
mean,
to
there
lock
is
them down.
also, of course, the
It's not just
classic.
a gun.
I have magic. That's cool. Pulls out gun. Bang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Listen, I want to see them equipped with knuckle dusters and
Guns
Chinese finger traps.
guns do exist. It is directly confronted in what LeMay gave us.
Yep. Yep.
Apparently, Ivan doesn't like guns. I don't know why, because I don't have the full book, but doesn't
And
like
that's
guns.
fine. You can give us a really good reason for Ivan not liking guns.
Yeah. Certainly. No, I mean, there's a bunch of character quirks that are nice and lovely. But here's the thing, right, LeMay? If your character doesn't like guns, and your character can't cast magic, and your character is supposed to be someone who fights and detains enemy weavers, whether they are rogue weavers, or enemies of the state, or whatever. That means that he needs to have some form of combat for fighting weavers, because if he doesn't have a range option, that means either throwing knives,
Throwing needles
bow,
in this case, apparently.
needles. Okay, that's perfectly fine.
Yep.
But he needs to be an expert in that, because throwing needles is not something you can just be like, a needle, and call it a day. Unlike a bullet,
No.
unlike an arrow, unlike a knife.
Yeah.
Oh,
I've
so he's
tried throwing
Haku.
needles. I can't wrap my head around the technique. It just don't work for me.
And we're doing the Midwest goodbye. Oh yeah, I'll see you later. Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing.
Very much the Midwest goodbye.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as that goes, he needs to be an expert in CQC to some degree, as reasonable it is for a 19-year-old to be. If he's part of the family business, and the family business for multiple generations has been to hunt down and fight weavers and detain them when they go rogue, then he needs to be learning some sort of family martial art that focuses on detaining weavers. He needs to be, if he's using throwing needles, he needs to be a fucking expert in throwing needles. I can't find a story interesting if the main character is gonna be like, oh yeah, well, I hate guns, I can't use magic, I don't know what CQC is. I got these throwing needles though. What's
Well, no, but
Yeah.
Sneaky, LeMay did make it clear there is grappling, and they do have training. So
No, I know. I'm just saying,
And-
as
and-
in
and what-
general understanding
yeah.
of
And-
you know.
as far as the character not liking firearms, like, well, what reason is it? Is it the whole like my parents are dead? Is that why like he doesn't use the firearms, or was it explained?
Well, the parent was
Not in
mysteriously
this
killed.
Your mother
Okay.
mysteriously died. Nothing's
Yeah.
been explained about the firearms thing. We've only been introduced to the matriarch of the
I-
household, Ivan.
I'd say
Ivan's uncle.
whether it's like the characters, like the whole Batman thing, like again, that's been done. So maybe like it could be like they had PTSD, like there's a war or something happened. Just give us a reason why he doesn't like guns, just to like ground it a little bit, just so it's not a
No,
bullet point
tradition's
limitation.
perfectly fine. No, I mean,
hoping
tradition's no
it'll
problem.
come up
Oh,
at some
tradition. Oh, okay. I didn't hear the
Yeah.
tradition thing. Sorry, it's probably late for me.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
tradition that works perfectly fine. Yeah, that checks
Yeah,
out.
it's totally fine. I
Well,
mean,
it's
but
yeah,
what I'm
it's
saying
not
though is
tradition.
no matter what the reason is, if they're going to choose a disadvantaged art to go about doing it, go about fighting them, if they're going to put themselves at a disadvantage, they need to show an increased amount of skill. Like you can have an unskilled, I say unskilled, but you know what I mean, unskilled versus like a 25-year-old SOG operator. You can have an unskilled gun user, newly minted detective for the family. He's decent at CQC, but he uses a gun, so that usually works out for him. Like, you can have that. But if you're going to be like, oh, he's going to use this really esoteric weapon that's super precise, you can't have him be a casual with it.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, think of I immediately thought of like samurai culture, where like, especially after like the Portuguese, like had arrived like in the warring state period of like Japan. So the samurai had the Tanagashima, like that, the gun, like concept, but samurai were still like on horseback, like shooting bows and like using like samurai swords or whatever. But it was like a warrior culture with the Bushido code and like an intense amount of dedication. And so in some way, if the character is using a needle weapon that's like a family, like heirloom weapon, like style, there needs to be some kind of philosophy, and like this is like an aspect of the character's personality for it to
Right, exactly.
make sense.
Yeah. But we've done a lot of work. We've talked a lot, and you know what? We have done it again to another man. Aeon Black here got the first taste of the extended podcast edition, where we try to end the podcast 3 hours ago, said one more thing, and then went on a 3-hour continued rant. And you know what? That is just a classic tale of time for us. This podcast of 5-hour length will join the many other 5-hour podcasts that continuously bloat the amount of time we've been on the air. So I hope everyone has a good weekend, but come back.